Antimage and Isekai LitRPG Adventure Ends of Magic Book 1. Audiobook by Kevin Chapter 41 Fightful Whether the heirs gathered against the railing to inspect the horizon. It looked like a normal storm to Nathan. One that towered high into the sky, sure, but nothing about it screamed magic. But he wasn't the expert. That was Eowyn, and he'd trust her when she said that the dark clouds were a sign of their enemies. "Do we flee?" Katja asked, eyes on the distant blotch of the storm. Their captain's expression was troubled. "No, I cannot play such a symphony of speed. Look at how quickly the cloud grows." All of the heirs turned their attention back to the horizon, and it didn't take long for them to spot what Eowyn had seen. The storm was growing bigger by the second. With the distances involved, that meant it was moving ridiculously fast. "What do we do?" Nathan asked. "Try to lose the trail or fight?" Eowyn gave him her full attention. "I will cloak us in mists to enhance my evasion skills, but they have tracked us across the oceans already. This is a prophecy of conflict." Her mouth twisted in grim humor. "I had not intended such a trial, but it will prove your power better than the sea cutters." She strode back towards the throne from which she commanded the ship, her arm flicking out to deposit the flute in her hand. Nathan walked after her, the heirs trailing behind. "Can you tell us more about them? If we're going to end up fighting the Maelstrom, it would be good to know what they can do. They control the storm, what else? How many ships are in there?" Eowyn took her seat but didn't raise her flute to her lips. She gave the heirs a tight-lipped nod. "The captains of the Maelstrom are all-powerful storm mages. One would be enough to summon that storm, though there could be any number hidden inside. It would be a deadly surprise for there to be more than two. I expect only one. The captains of the Maelstrom are expensive hunters, for each one is personally tutored by the maestro." She tapped a finger against her lips thoughtfully. "Their officers will be apprentices and heirs, each on the path of a similar power to the captain but not yet given the crucial insights. The crew will be small, but each is said to have a different melange of skills and talents from across Davrar. All will be deadly." She waved a hand idly as if to dismiss what she just said. "Their true power is the storm. They will batter us with the weather, and if we survive, they will emerge from the storm at a time and place of their choosing. On the seas they control the flow of battle." Nathan snorted through his nose. "Maybe I can contest that power." Eowyn nodded, though her expression remained grim as she raised the flute to her lips. Stella cocked her head. "Why don't the beasts of the depths you warned us about attack them, if they're throwing around so much magic?" Eowyn let loose a sigh and lowered her flute again, answering sharply. "It is another insight from the maestro, to control and direct the beasts of the depths. Their ships are not attacked by the monsters of the depths, and so they use their magics without fear." She cocked an eyebrow to ask if there were any further interruptions, and when there weren't, she brought the flute to her lips and began to play a haunting melody. Silvery mist billowed forth from the ship, shrouding them in a sound-deadening blanket that seemed to make the world less real and more ethereal. Nathan could feel magic and wizardry woven through the mist and did his best not to disrupt it. The heirs retreated to the other end of the boat so they could talk without disturbing Eowyn's music. "Do we hope that she can escape?" Arl asked to start them off. Nathan shrugged. "If she can, great. If she can't, then we'll have to fight. So let's plan for the fight. I can make an attempt to control the storm, but I'm not a storm mage," Stella said apologetically. "I can pour air and water mana into this target, but I don't understand storms. I won't win that fight." Nathan smiled. "I don't think you'll need to. I'll break their control first, then you'll have free reign." She smiled at that, but still seemed uncertain. "What can I do with it? I can't turn the storm against them." Sarah shook her head. "They're used to fighting on a battlefield they control. Take that away from them, calm the storm, and then we can fight them normally. On a calm ocean I could shoot their captain from 10 miles away." Stella bit her lip in thought. "Maybe. This is an unexplored dungeon. I don't know the dangers." "We could take flight," Arl suggested. "Calm the storm and attack them directly from up close. Not an angle they'd expect. Kachai shook his head. Too much risk. That would leave Eolin exposed and depends on Stella controlling the winds. We disrupt the winds but then protect the grace of the mists and attack them from afar. He gestured to Sarah. Strike down their captain and the victory is half won. Sarah looked around the ship. I'll need to be up high to guarantee a shot, she pointed up. Atop the mast, but somebody will need to protect me from attacks. I'll go with you, Arl said, bumping his sister's shoulder. I'll block anything that comes towards us. Then Kachai, Stella, and I stay near Eolin. We keep her safe and disrupt the storm, Nathan said with a nod. What if they board the ship? Kachai asked. Then we kick them off, Nathan replied. Eolin might be able to handle it, but they might have counters to the magic of the ship. We don't know about their powers, but we know how to fight uncertain threats. I'll prevent any crazy magic. Kachai can block or disrupt anything else, and Arl can beat any fighters once they're deprived of their tricks. Stella and Sarah can target the others. He caught Stella's gaze. If what Eolin said is true, then you can cast more powerful magic without worrying about calling up something nasty. I don't know if I want to be near your new fire spell, but it's an option. She smiled a crooked smile. First, let's calm the storm. They talked through a few other minor refinements to the plan, then restlessly separated to get into position as the waves picked up. Before he ascended to the mast, Arl spoke a few wry words. Don't break all of the enchanted weapons with your aura. But he was being at least a bit serious. Makes sense. His class, Reliquialder, revolves around taking and using powerful magic items. Eolin had kept up her flute music, and the mist lay thick upon the ship. That meant Nathan could barely see his hand in front of his face, but through his magical senses he could feel Arl and Sarah high above, waiting on the small platform atop the tallest mast. If it came to combat, Sarah would have her shot, but he and Stella would need to clear the storm first. A constant breeze was the first sign that their ploy to escape had failed. It started to break up the fog that surrounded the grace of the mists, and Eolin lowered her flute with a sigh. She sounded resigned. They have caught us. Are you prepared to fight? Nathan nodded grimly. We are. We're going to try to neutralize the storm and take out the captain. They won't expect us to sail straight at them, would they? A melody of victory. Eolin's uncertain tone didn't match her words. But she swung the grace of the mists around and sailed back the way they'd come, straight towards the heart of the storm. She started playing again, this time a rising call to action. Soon enough, the encroaching winds had thoroughly dispelled the clinging mist to reveal the enormous storm towering overhead. It looked like a mountain poised to fall on them, with outriders of rain lashing the ocean all around. The waves grew even more turbulent as they dove towards the darkest part of the tempest. Nathan felt mana winding its way through the storm, though it wasn't pervasive. This wasn't a spell whipped up from nothing by a massively powerful wizard. The magic was more like a puppeteer's strings, guiding and encouraging a naturally existing storm. It was pretty much what Nathan had been expecting. Anything else would have been a ridiculous amount of magic. This was why he wasn't expecting to be able to neutralize the storm on his own. The underlying weather would keep going even after he cut the spell controlling it. He reached out with his aura, slurping up the nearest tendrils of mana as the grace of the mists bounded over the waves to the sound of Eolin's flute. It didn't seem to make much of a difference to the storm, so Nathan cast his net wider. The magic grew thicker as they drove further underneath the towering thunderhead. The ship bucked against the waves just as tall as those off the coast, and Eolin's magic fought to keep the ship steady. Nathan burned stamina to spread his anti-magic, seeking not to saturate the area, but to follow the tendrils of magic and cut loose as much of the controlling web as he could. His attention was split too many ways, so he sat cross-legged on the deck, closing his eyes against the driving rain and spending focus to keep his aura under control. Stella took that as the signal to send out her own magic and attempt to contest the storm. Her air mana spiraled upwards in an elegant construct that forcibly suppressed the movement of the nearby air by creating hundreds of little vortices. The waves around them calmed as Stella sunk tendrils of water mana into the ocean and forcibly calmed it, though it was more of a brute force effect than a simple spell. Regardless, she sunk incredible amounts of mana into the two spells, and Nathan could feel the power rushing out of his friend in a torrent as she calmed the local storm. That was a bridge too far for the storm mage controlling the spell. The knotwork of mana outside of Nathan's range swiveled towards them, directing the full wrath of the storm down upon the bubble of calm that surrounded the grace of the mists. The waves swelled again, pushing against Stella's spellwork. Lightning struck down at them and was diverted down a magnetic channel she'd set up beforehand. Stella's breathing grew harsher as she fought against the storm mage controlling the spell, even though they couldn't directly reach through Nathan to contest her. She spun out webs of her own through the air to turn the wind against itself, and generated waves to cancel the mountains of water surging towards them. She was getting better, but not quickly enough. Nathan stretched his aura out even wider. He fought against the influence of the storm mage, trying to break their control over the storm as a whole. Their web of mana stretched for miles, beyond the range of Nathan's magical senses. But by burning enormous amounts of stamina, his aura could reach that far, and he piggybacked his senses along his aura as it stretched ever outwards. Mystical discernment 3 achieved. Nathan's awareness expanded to encompass ever more of the storm. It was almost too much information, but he spent focus to help digest the immense amount of data. The weather around them calmed as Stella regained control and began pushing out the bubble of her spellwork. She wasn't able to stretch her influence to the entire area Nathan had cleared, but it was still an impressive display of reach. At the very edges of Nathan's aura, he caught a flash of magic emerging from a seemingly empty patch of ocean. A packet of magic sped in their direction and he called out a warning. Incoming! He tried to catch the projectile with his aura, but he was spread too thin and the attack was moving too fast. He managed to brush it with his aura and shredded a guidance spell. Tranquility 3 achieved. Eolin's flute trilled on a high note and the grace of the mists turned sharply. The hull dug into the water as the ship changed course, and everybody had to grab onto something to keep their footing. The attack covered miles of distance in seconds before flashing past to detonate on a nearby wave like a naval shell. Stella was already extending her magic in the direction the spell had come from, creating a tunnel of clear air in that direction. Nathan followed her lead, sending tendrils of antimagic to quest around the origin point. But there was nothing there and his brows furrowed. What's going on? It's just empty ocean. Then he remembered how submarine combat worked on Earth. It was a stealth contest. If they could see you, you were vulnerable. And if you fight in a storm, the same idea applies. The Maelstrom thrives on hiding themselves in a storm of their own creation. I bet it's a standard tactic to use decoy spells or something to get your enemy looking in the wrong direction. It's a decoy, he said aloud, redirecting his attention to locate the enemy's true position. He burned focus to broaden his attention, allowing his magical senses to run through the cloud of aura spread multiple miles in every direction. He caught another spell as it activated, and his antimagic shredded the heavy-duty fire and force mana. He was burning stamina much faster than he was gaining it, but he was winning. The enemy was losing control over the storm. Aura Control 5 achieved. Stella threw her magic out wide once more, seeking to dominate the whole area. She swirled the winds around to generate a bubble of calm. The waves subsided, and Nathan felt sunlight on his face. We're beating them, stealing the storm from them. Once I find them, we'll be able to flip this whole situation around. I'm just on a time limit before I run out of stamina from spreading my aura this wide. Nathan scoured the ocean for anomalies, paying close attention to ensure he wouldn't get tricked by a stealth skill that worked on his magical senses. There was nothing. Am I sure they're on the water? They could be underwater or airborne. Surely that's within the capability of a storm mage, and it would probably throw off a bunch of ocean-based skills. Likely airborne. He looked for other abnormalities in the clouds. There were dozens of patches of calm air spread throughout the storm that circled around them. Too many to check each individually. Nathan spent focus and cross-referenced the clear air with the nodes of mana controlling the storm, coming away with 5 potential options. Then he felt a pulse propagate outwards from one of those zones, spreading through the magic that held the storm together. Congratulations, you have developed the alertness utility skill into forewarning. Utility skill. Forewarning, you will see every detail and have early warning of danger. He struck at that spot with his anti-magic, ignoring layers of stealth skills that tried to convince him there was nothing there. His aura latched onto an object absolutely buzzing with enchantments, and his mouth curved into a grin. Got you. The pulse that had alerted him to the danger finished propagating through every part of the storm his aura didn't reach, and it contracted like a punctured bubble. The storm fell upon the grace of the mists like a hammer of the heavens. He opened his eyes and looked up. They sailed in the eye of a hurricane, with a wall of fast-moving clouds in all directions. That wall buckled and gave way as he watched. The storm reached for them from all directions. Well, shit. Chapter 42 Pirates at the end. Stella tried to hold back the encroaching weather with her magic, but it was a doomed endeavor. The storm crashing down upon them was the size of a mountain, and it was all her magic could do to blunt the force of the gale. A solid sheet of water lashed at the grace of the mists, and Nathan had to hold onto the railing to avoid being swept away. The wind rose to a howl, but Kachai's voice boomed clear and certain through it. I stand as a rock in the tide. No storm will bend me, and no magic will break me. A dome of light materialized around the entire ship, and the wind cut out in an instant. Huge waves battered against Kachai's shield and slid off without finding purchase. It wasn't like their enemies had regained control, since Nathan had cut all of the links between the enemy ship and the rest of the storm. But the enemy mage had set the entire storm up to fall on the grace of the mists, and now that was playing out without their oversight. Doubtless they'd had a follow-up plan to ensure the heir's death, but now their magic drifted aimlessly, the spell unraveling without direct control. Nathan reeled in the extraneous parts of his aura to reduce the stamina drain and thicken the tendrils of anti-magic connecting him to the enemy ship. He started tearing at the powerful enchantments woven into the hull. The maelstrom ship bobbed in midair like a cork before falling out of the sky. His anti-magic chased it downwards, ripping apart magical sails and denying every attempt to steer the weather and soften their landing. Let's see how you deal with falling a few thousand feet. Koch gritted his teeth under the strain of holding back the entire storm. He looked back to Eilin for a cue, and at her gesture he dropped his shield. They were once more exposed to the turmoil of the storm. But the raging intensity of the initial moments had passed, and between Eilin's expert piloting and Stella creating a circling shield of wind, their ship wasn't immediately crushed by the weight of the storm. Nathan spared a glance upwards to see both Arl and Sarah still clinging onto the top of the mast. He wasn't sure how they'd held on against the storm, but they'd managed it. I'm just not sure it'll be necessary. The enemies are going to splat right about. Some kind of emergency enchantment flared deep in the enemy ship's hull, and it decelerated quickly before landing heavily in the water about a mile distant. At this range, it was hard to determine details, but that crash seemed eminently survivable. He glanced at his stamina, just above 25,000. He'd burned nearly 50,000 points over the last few minutes, expanding his aura wide enough to combat the storm. It had worked, but it was an order of magnitude more than he'd ever spent on anything before. No wonder it gave me a rank up to my anti-magic, and I can feel that it's bigger and more efficient now. But it's time to be a bit more conservative. I want to hold back enough for a full regeneration. Their enemies seem to be coming to them regardless. The Maelstrom ship was cutting through the storm in their direction, propelled by skills and a few small physical sails that caught the gale-force winds and hurled them forwards. If they'd been thrown off by the 1,000-foot drop, there wasn't any sign of it. "Enemies approaching," Nathan yelled. He enhanced the power of his voice with high-tier battle cry, and he saw Sarah's face looking down on him through the curtains of rain. Then she lifted her rifle and aimed it in the direction he was pointing. Eolin's flute rose in a furious melody, each note slicing through the storm like a blade. The grace of the mist surged at her command, extra sails appearing out of silvery mist to catch the winds. The sails buckled under the force but held, and their ship was sent surging forwards towards the enemy. The distance between the two ships closed rapidly. Nathan shut down a half-dozen more attempts to regain control of the storm, as well as several attack spells hurled in their direction. At this range, his aura didn't have fine enough control to focus in on individual mages, but the cloud of anti-magic certainly prevented them from casting any large-scale spells, and every time they tried it just offset the cost for Nathan extending his aura so far. That's something to work on. Fine control at long distances. A shot sounded above as Sarah's skills were able to penetrate the obscuring rain. Moments later, a few answering projectiles were fired towards them from the enemy ship. They shouldn't have been able to fly straight through the howling winds, but the enemy builds were clearly optimized to fight in storms. "Incoming!" Nathan yelled again as he killed the enchantments on the volley. Kachai stepped in front of Eolin and raised his shield just in time to catch a pair of arrows that would have struck her in the chest. Up above, Arl batted away another with Jouse's enormous club. High-tier battle cry 3 achieved. Nathan got up from his cross-legged position and started walking towards the bow of the ship. He looked over his shoulder. "They're closing. I'll take out the mages, protect Eolin." He met Kachai's gaze and then flicked his eyes to Stella. The wolfman nodded his understanding, and Nathan turned to sprint over the pitching deck towards the enemy. He used airwalk just as much as he touched the deck as sheets of rain pounded the ship and made the wood slippery. Stella was throwing around an enormous amount of magic to calm things down, but the simple fact was that she didn't know how to control the weather, and trying to brute force a storm system was beyond her capabilities. Though she's having more success than I would have guessed. This is probably giving her a ton of developments. Nathan reached the bow in time to see the shadow of a Maelstrom ship appear out of the storm ahead, closing fast. It was still too far away to see any details, but his magical senses let him pick out several sets of enchanted gear on the forward deck. Probably the crew preparing to board, though it could be a bunch of suits of empty armor getting ready to make the jump. He shook his head. He would be able to feel any magical automata from here, and this wasn't that. This was 10 fighters decked to the nines in enchanted gear preparing to assault the grace of the mists. Sarah's rifle cracked overhead and one of the figures fell. They got back to their feet after a moment, the magic on their helmets sturdy enough to withstand a large-caliber bullet to the nosepiece. The question is, when do I wipe all of their enchantments? As soon as possible, or at the moment they commit? And should I delete everything or leave some of their magic intact for loot? Nathan's hesitation made the decision for him as the enemy ship put on a burst of speed. With an ululating cry, the enemy fighters leapt into the air to board the ship, most of them aiming straight for the bow where he was standing. The sound cut through the storm unnaturally clearly and froze Nathan in place with a sudden bone-chilling fear. The noise was definitely a skill, or a series of skills. It reached back into his brainstem and awakened instincts that had served the ancient ancestors of humans well. It bypassed his rational thought and told him that he was a small furry mammal, and the battle cry belonged to a predator. A predator so far above him that his only options were to hide or flee. It took Nathan a half-second to shake off the effect, and it pissed him off. He leapt into the air and lashed out with his concentrated aura, stripping all but the hardiest of enchantments off of the would-be boarders and the archers behind them. Two of them depended on enchantments to make the jump, and the sudden lack of lift sent them tumbling into the storm-tossed waves. But in that moment, Nathan became the target for every one of the elite fighters coming for him. Axes and other hurled blades tore through the rain, and a trio of archers remaining on the Maelstrom ship tracked him with their arrows. Forewarning 2 achieved. He juked, implementing the insight he'd figured out earlier when playing clay pigeon for Sarah. It was all about convincing the enemies he'd committed to emotion, then using his skills to pivot out of the way the moment they committed in turn. The storm made it easier, disguising his motions and letting him hitch a ride on the gusts of wind for sudden vector changes. Nonetheless, Nathan felt pride as he dodged all of their attacks, including a half-dozen arrows and a whip still enchanted with potent force magic. Congratulations! You have developed the effortless dodge utility skill into evasion. Utility skill. Evasion. This skill will help you move to dodge attacks easily while deceiving your foes as to your intentions. The ships began circling each other like sharks, Eolin's flute forming a counterplay with the gusts of wind and booming lightning of the storm. A saber-armed woman leapt off a rope she was swinging on and flew in Nathan's direction. He dodged straight down, feet thumping on the deck as she sailed overhead. Without a backwards glance, she took off down the length of the ship towards where Eolin sat. As she got close, the dimensional wizardry attached to the ship swallowed her whole. The remaining 6 fighters congregated on Nathan, forming a loose cordon and pressing it in to keep him pinned. He took a few wounds in quick succession, though none were debilitating. He considered trying to break through the encirclement, but opted to keep their attention focused on him, kicking to knock somebody's leg out from under them with the sound of breaking bone. His allies attacked the flankers in a coordinated salvo a moment later. Another bullet from Sarah nailed one in the head, and this time their helmet didn't save them. A quick laser beam from Stella caught a man wielding a huge spiked shield across the side, and the explosion of superheated steam blasted him clear off the ship. But it was Arl who claimed the spotlight, falling out of the storm like a metallic statue with a greatsword in one hand and a trident in the other. A man who'd been dancing along the wind spun and crossed his short swords to block the blow, but the disintegration-edged greatsword sliced through weapons, arms, and torso in a single cleaving blow. The trident's haft extended to pin the person Nathan had knocked over to the deck. The enchanted whip cracked towards Arl with supersonic speed, pushing him backwards with blasts of force as he tried to close the distance. Nathan was engaged in a duel with a knife wielder who moved with incredible speed. Unfortunately, she seemed to rely on flicking knives at eyes and striking at vulnerable spots. Those tactics didn't work well on Nathan, and he accepted a knife in his eye socket and a sliced throat to deliver a punch to the chest that caved in the woman's sternum and drove shards of bone into her heart. Spellslayer level 540 achieved. You have killed the accomplished duelist Ethne Bloodkirk in close combat. The wounds did distract Nathan enough that the mages aboard the Maelstrom ship had a chance to act. A trio of powerful spells flew towards where Stella and Katja protected Eolin, and Katja's golden shield blossomed to block them all. The enemy mage reached up into the storm once more, and they called a torrent of lightning down upon the grace of the mists. Again, Stella caught the spell in a magnetic grasp and redirected it, this time directly onto the enemy ship. Their mast exploded, sending wooden shrapnel flying in all directions as fires flickered to life, and were immediately quenched by the downpour of rain. Arl won his duel by using his free hand to hurl the invisible axe at his opponent, disguising the motion as an attempt to catch the whip. His opponent slammed lifeless to the deck even as Sarah shot down the last boarder. Arl descended to reclaim his axe and snatch the force whip, which had survived Nathan's aura. They turned together towards the Maelstrom ship. Nathan was just about to jump into the air and counterboard when a deep booming sound thrummed through the air. It was like somebody had struck a massive drum that resonated both audibly and magically. Nathan held out a hand towards Arl and sent his aura questing over to the other ship. He'd scanned it from a distance, but hadn't had the resolution to pick out individuals. Now he did, and he didn't find anybody on the other ship. At least no mages or people wearing enchanted armor. There was something going on in the space above the ship, a diffuse cloud of magic that didn't feel like a spell so much as mana infused into a skill. Then what's going on? What was that? The drumbeat sounded again, thum-thum, this time accompanied by a pulse emanating from the hull of the Maelstrom ship and propagating through the water below. It attached a tether of wizardry to the grace of the mists, a construct that sent a tremor through the barrier between the physical world and the place where mana pools and divinity lived. Oh hell no. I think they're trying to summon something and direct it at us. Nathan turned his focus to unraveling the wizardry that had been attached to the grace of the mists. It wasn't overly complicated or built to resist tampering, but it was something new that he wanted to understand before he destroyed it. He grew momentarily confused as he picked apart the wizardry. It didn't seem designed to do anything beyond pulse occasionally like a beacon. He dismantled the wizardry with a bit of his aura, then turned his attention fully to the mystery aboard the other ship. It pulsed with magic again, and Nathan parried the second attempt to attach a beacon to the grace of the mists. There wasn't anything he could do about the surge of wizardry going in every other direction, not unless he wanted to expand his aura again, but instead he focused on the ship and the strange cloud of magic hovering over it. It wasn't a spell, and resisted even directed attempts to disrupt it. I've got a class skill that says that my anti-magic works on anything not based in physical reality. Even though this is a skill, it's a skill based in magic. I can break that. He probed for details, first noting that there were 3 separate mana pools smeared across the ship. Then he saw the way that the mana was constantly swirling and eddying, never pausing. He struck with his aura, aiming to lock the mana in place with magical manipulation. Arcane Insight 4 achieved. The mana congealed and 3 figures dropped to the deck, stumbling as they hit the wood at awkward angles. Sarah's rifle fired from the rigging above, and one of the figures fell without a head. A quick laser blast from Stella nailed the second. The third tried to spin up a shield spell, but Nathan ripped it apart in time for Sarah's second round to strike home and splash a red cloud into the storm. A clean sweep. Nathan looked back towards the aftercastle where Elin sat to see what their next move was. He wanted to go search the Maelstrom ship for loot, but didn't know if that was the right choice. He'd broken the tether that had attached itself to the grace of the mists, but the summoning call had still gone out. But it could take hours for anything to come of it. Elin answered his question as her flute surged, and he had to hold on as the grace of the mists accelerated away at high speed. Arl glanced over at him, looking clueless. "Why are we running?" Then he shrugged and started collecting the bodies and gear that had fallen to the deck. "I think the Maelstrom ship summoned something," Nathan replied, then bent to help him. They both jerked back upright as a deep roar shuddered its way through Nathan's bones. He looked around nervously for the source of the noise but couldn't find it, even as the sound continued to grow. Then, with a sound like a waterfall, a massive head rose from the water on the far side of the rapidly receding Maelstrom ship. The creature's head was 50 feet across, and the entire front of it was taken up by a huge gaping lamprey mouth ringed with sharp inwards-facing teeth. The massive maw rose high into the air atop a thick, muscular neck and then struck at the other ship, burrowing into the wood like a power drill. 5 more heads broke the surface all around the maelstrom ship, diving in to join the feast. Chapter 43. The awakened depths. Nathan watched the half-dozen huge lamprey-headed eels tear apart the maelstrom ship with disgust. It was like watching a pile of writhing worms, but each worm was as thick as a 4-lane highway and slick with rainwater cascading off pale, wrinkled skin. The sounds of splintering wood carried through the storm, eerily reminiscent of snapping bone. He bounded up the stairs to the raised rear of the ship, joining Stella and Koch next to Eolin's command throne. He noted another figure sprawled against the railing with their head caved in. They wore dark leathers and still held a pair of long daggers. Somebody who slipped past us to take a shot at Eolin or Stella. Glad Kochai was here. What are those? Nathan asked Eolin, who was still playing a frantic tune to drive the grace of the mists away from the monsters. She took her flute away from her mouth and inhaled deeply before responding. That is a hydra eel, a monster of the depths. Beware its blood, and do not cut off any of the heads. She directed that last towards Arl before resuming her song and driving the ship forward. Wait, that's a single monster, with some kind of healing abilities and toxic blood. That's not great. Nathan walked over to the rear of the ship and examined the monster with senses both mundane and magical. It didn't seem particularly magical to him, just huge. The giant heads battered each other over the scraps of the ship that they'd consumed, growing fainter as the distance grew through the storm. We're moving pretty quick. Maybe we'll make a clean getaway. Nathan cursed himself a moment later as one of the giant heads turned to face their direction and let loose a keening howl before launching itself in pursuit. It surged through the water quickly, arching between waves as it rapidly gained on the grace of the mists. The other heads were still searching for scraps of wood bobbing in the water, and the giant worm chasing the airs pulled up short as the others yanked against it. But they turned to see the ship, and a second and then third of the hunting cries cut through the storm. Nathan glanced nervously at Stella, who was studying the hydra with a curled lip. She saw his glance and spoke over Eolin's flute music. Ending's damned weather will interfere with my spells. Can you clear it? She didn't wait for a response, lifting her hands and starting to channel water mana into the ocean underneath them. The wake of their ship grew into a wave at her command until it blocked the view of the hydra eel. I can hit that target. Kochai stepped up on Nathan's other side. He set his shield against the railing and racked his hammer at his side before raising both hands upwards towards the storming sky. This storm is summoned by thieves and murderers. We have slain them in righteous battle. Let sunlight shine upon our victory. His voice was serene, a statement uttered with calm certainty instead of a beseeching prayer. Divine mana surged through him and shot upwards into the sky like a spear aimed for the heavens. Nathan followed the path of the divine mana as it traveled beyond visible range. It didn't seem to be doing anything in particular, just going upwards. Then at the farthest edge of his range, he felt it break through the cloud cover and blossom in the sunlight. The relatively minuscule amount of power drank in the light from above and pried apart the clouds to allow a ray of sunshine to break through and illuminate the ship. With everything I know about magic, that shouldn't have worked. It was less mana than Stella was using and wasn't as expertly wielded as the Storm Mage's mana. But I already knew I didn't fully understand divine mana. It's more motivated by emotion and significance than normal cause and effect. The area illuminated by the sunlight expanded rapidly. The rain morphed from a heavy downpour into a light drizzle, and the winds calmed down to a light roar. The waves ahead were still large, but nowhere near the mountains of water from earlier. They all paled beside the giant wave that Stella was dragging behind the boat. It was taller than the ship now, and large enough that the edge was starting to tilt the grace of the mists forward. But Stella continued to pour mana into the construct, treating it as if it was one of the lightning capacitors she'd grown fond of. Nathan sent his aura outwards, attempting to get a bead on the Hydra eel but found nothing. He didn't know where it was, and that made him nervous. It could be swimming underneath Stella's wave at this very moment, and he wouldn't be able to tell. He darted a look towards Eowyn. She seemed unconcerned, and he clenched his fists helplessly. There's not much I can do here. It's not a magical creature, just a massive one. Stella's wave continued to grow until it was large enough that the grace of the mists was properly surfing down the leading edge now. She was pouring an enormous amount of mana into the water, but it was working. They were accelerating and dragging the sunlight with them. Then the water halfway up the wave bulged outwards, and one of the lamprey heads of the Hydra eel burst forth. Water cascaded away from inwards-facing teeth as it keened out its hunting call. From this distance Nathan could see a ring of a half-dozen eyes spread around the rim of the mouth, each the size of a tennis ball. One of them popped in a spray of ichor as Sarah's rifle cracked. The beast flinched backwards, disappearing back into the wave. Arl had drawn the instant death knife and was studying the beast. His thoughts were obvious, and Nathan met his friend's eyes and shook his head. He knew what his friend was thinking, but it didn't seem like the wisest course of action. Not yet, at least. We don't know if it will work on something this large, especially something renowned for its ability to heal almost any wound. 3 of the Hydra's heads surged out of the water, each of them emerging from high on the wave and towering over the airs. They reared back as one to strike at the grace of the mists, and Arl tensed to jump forward. Before he could, Kachai raised his shield and banged his hammer against it. The sunlight shining down on them focused on the reflective metal, and the wave was illuminated in a stark glare like a flashbang. Kachai's magic was threaded through the spell, causing the light to scorch the pale and wrinkled skin of the Hydra. Eyes steamed, and all 3 heads jerked back into the wave, roaring in pain as they retreated from the burning light. The roars continued, the noise deeper due to being conducted through the water. It sounded like a tortured wail. Eowyn's flute blew a long and sustained note, and the grace of the mists jerked forwards on a sudden gust of magical wind, avoiding another head that emerged from the water where they'd been just a second before. 2 more of the Hydra's heads emerged on either side, and Nathan couldn't tell if these were the other 3 heads or just the same ones Kacha had blinded. The eyes were whole, but they might have simply healed. They rapidly oriented to chase the grace of the mists, and Nathan looked around for somebody else to have an answer. Stella was spooling up a spell using all of the water mana she'd built into the wave, but that much water and mana took a few seconds to change direction. The leading head would reach them first. Sarah's rifle spoke from overhead, and she must have loaded one of the explosive rounds she carried because the foremost head suddenly fountained gore. Where the blood touched the water, it erupted into steam in a series of small, violent explosions. That head jerked and writhed, tangling up the other 2 heads long enough for Stella to complete her spell. The wave they were riding on changed direction suddenly, the currents that had been chasing the grace of the mists eddying and swirling to reverse direction. The entire wave pivoted in an instant and shot away from them at high speed. The Hydra eel was caught in the hydraulics and tumbled as it was carried by the wave. Nathan caught a glimpse of the central body, gray slugskin stretching for hundreds of feet. Sarah's rifle fired again, and another splash of blood was followed by an explosion of steam. Stella followed up with a quick laser blast, further obscuring their view with more steam. The wave sped off into the distance, showing little sign of growing smaller as it carried the monster away into the bulk of the storm. The heirs watched it go, wearing concerned expressions. Is it gone? Hear me, I hope so, Arl said, but he didn't put away his weapons. Stella brought her hands together and started channeling a purple fireball between them. "Don't bait the castle bear." She guided huge flows of mana together delicately, forming an intricate construct of fire, force, and plasma. With a jolt, Nathan realized that she was preparing the spell that had burned down a good chunk of Litcliffe. He shot a look towards Eowyn, who returned his gaze with a sour expression but continued playing her flute. Nathan turned his attention back to Stella's spell. It had taken her several minutes to cast before, and now that Nathan was watching from up close he could see why. It was a hellishly complicated series of constructs based on the Grand Fireball, spell Nathan had seen demonstrated in the Ascendant Academy, along with a half-dozen flourishes of Stella's own added atop that framework. For one thing, it used both plasma and fire mana. It also had a propulsion function that would accelerate the spell in a chosen direction. There was a steering mechanism to let Stella remotely guide the spell, and multiple layers of protective spellwork to prevent it from being simply countered. But all of it was wrapped around the core of the spell, which was an elegant twist of magic that generated fire mana when things burned. Nathan studied it in more detail, marveling at what Stella had created. He understood where most of the components came from, but what she'd done with them was truly a work of genius. He probed deeper with his senses, careful to keep his anti-magic away from the delicate innards of the spell. This is bordering on wizardry. It's twisting the rules of the world in a local area in favor of the magic she's trying to create. Sarah thumped to the deck nearby, still aiming down her rifle towards the distant wave. "It's diving." She kept her gun leveled, frowning down the barrel. "It might still be chasing us." The flute music cut off as Eowyn spoke, her words clipped. "It is sure as song. Wounding it seriously or leading it on a chase for a day will make it leave." "Have you stared this ghoul in the eye before?" Arl asked without looking back, his gaze panning over the horizon. Eowyn snorted delicately. What a hard-grained saying. "But yes, I was in convoy with another ship that could sing the song of the winds when a hydra eel scented the treasure we carried. It was smaller than this one and only abandoned the chase after a day and a night of pursuit." Stella smirked, though the majority of her concentration was on the reality-warping fireball she held contained between her hands. "Then let's kill the problem." Sarah sighed in resignation, holding up 6 bullets marked to indicate explosive enchantments. "A big monster needs big weapons." Eowyn nodded reluctantly. "The beast will try to come from beneath. I will mark its approach. You must halt it before it reaches us." She wrinkled her nose at Stella's spell. "I wish that magic nowhere near my ship." She raised her flute to her lips again and began playing, this time something that was more like a haunting dirge. Mist spread out from the base of the ship, staying low across the water and following in their wake as they sailed away from the violent clouds that were all that was left of the storm summoned by the Maelstrom ship. Arl gestured in the direction the Hydra eel would be approaching from. "How do we get it above water? Can Kachai do it? Or am I going swimming?" His smile at the end made it clear that he hoped the last part was just a joke. Kachai gazed thoughtfully into the water. After a moment he shook his head. "I can blind, block, and bind a monster such as this, but I cannot raise it from the depths or part the waters to reach it." "It's coming," Sarah remarked sharply, pointing at a disturbance in the fog that roiled above the surface of the water about a half-mile away. "There." Stella exhaled in frustration, adding a few stabilizing touches to her spell. "I'll do it. Nathan, hold this." She gave the watermelon-sized ball of purple fire a push. The spell roared to life and shot upwards at an angle aimed towards nothing at all, quickly growing to the size of a horse. Then she clapped her hands together, channeling an enormous amount of mana into the water below them and towards the interruption that marked their enemy. The speed of the ship helped her out, and they left a thick trail of water mana behind them. Nathan reached out with his aura to catch the ball of flaring purple fire before it rocketed too far away. It took all of his attention to redirect it with magical manipulation, without destabilizing the spell structure that maintained and contained the ravenous fire wizardry. Call it what it is. I should chat with Stella more about this spell later. If she pushes this concept further, it could lead to incredible things. Terrifying things, but if it's her foothold into wizardry, that's a big deal. It took him a little while to figure out how to maintain a stable holding pattern, juggling the growing fireball between four tendrils of antimagic like the world's most dangerous Diablo. He looked back down just in time to see Stella gesture like she was parting the waves. The fog cleared obligingly as a massive chasm opened up in the water, a tear in the ocean that reached down hundreds of feet to expose lightless depths. Something writhed in the darkness down there, and Nathan's enhanced eyes picked out the Hydra eel at the bottom of the crevasse, heads questing upwards in surprise at the sudden invasion of its realm. Kachai's shield shone like a spotlight, illuminating the creature as he spoke an incantation. You shall not hide from your fate in the depths. Be revealed for the foul creature that you are. Bands of light wrapped around the necks of the massive monster. It thrashed against the magic but was held firm for the moment. Sarah fired her rifle, the sound deafening in such close proximity to Nathan's ear. A splash of gore showed where the enchanted round detonated inside one of the Hydra's heads. That head fell limp as the water around it erupted in steam from the caustic blood. Sarah's hands blurred as she reloaded the bolt-action mechanism with the enchanted cartridges. She fired again and again, blowing the brains out of each of the 6 heads in turn. But it wasn't dead. The main body still writhed in the grip of Kachai's magic, which was beginning to loosen. Stella gritted her teeth against the struggle of holding back so much water. Nathan brought the ball of purple fire down directly onto the main body of the creature. The spell had grown to the size of a bus from its passage through the air, and struck the Hydra eel with the roar of a ravenous inferno. The heat from the sudden flare of flame reached all the way up to the heirs, making them flinch back from the edge of the ship. With a clap of her hands, Stella closed the chasm in the water, sealing the Hydra eel in the depths with her purple flame for company. The grace of the mist sailed away, and the heirs watched as the ocean behind them was lit from beneath with purple fire, and massive bubbles broke the surface as the ocean boiled. "What do you call that spell, anyways?" Nathan asked, watching the bubbles pop against the surface, and feeling the spell spread to encompass the Hydra's entire body and the area around it. Stella smirked, her eyes lit from within by a flickering purple light. "I was thinking of calling it Firestorm, but now I like the name Hydrabane. End of Magic has leveled to 834. You and your party have slain a Hydra eel, a true monster of the depths, and defeated the feared hunter of the Maelstrom, Wraithstorm. Spellslayer has leveled to 564. You have contributed to killing a Hydra eel and slaying Wraithstorm and his crew." Chapter 44, planning a debate. Nathan looked out over the wide ocean, marveling at how calm it was given the craziness of the last few hours. The clouds behind them were gray and frothy, but bore none of the threatening weight they'd had before. Soft waves lapped at the hull, and the only sign of the giant monster they'd just defeated were some bubbles welling up from the sea behind them. "By the dawn's light," Arl breathed out, clapping Stella on the shoulder. "That was strong magic." She grinned widely but dipped her head towards the rest of them. "I couldn't have won this battle on my own. Kachai's magic of binding is beyond me, and Sarah's class has shown her power. We couldn't have held the ship without Arl and Nathan," she trailed off, gesturing vaguely in his direction. "You carried the weight of this battle on your anti-magic." He snorted lightly. "I didn't do much against the Hydra eel." She rolled her eyes. "You won the fight against the Maelstrom. They would have lashed us from afar with magic and storm without you." "Indeed," Elin broke in, finally standing from the captain's chair she'd sat in for the entire battle. "Ours would have been a song of driftwood and red waters if you hadn't called them to battle." She cocked her head at Nathan. How did you find the Maelstrom ship? They are invisible inside their own storms. She hesitated. Unless this question has a valuable answer, of course. It was in the air, flying, Nathan said, smiling wryly. The ship had enchantments that let the storm mages keep it aloft. It was also invisible and behind stealth skills. He shrugged. But I've dealt with that before. Eolin's lips parted. Nathan had never seen her at a loss for words before, but she was now. She gazed off into the distance, then her eyes refocused on him. And how far were they for you to detect them? Some distance, about 3 or so miles and 1,000 feet in the air. Nathan's response was even, and he watched for her reaction. I'm trying to impress her, after all. I don't think she knows my exact abilities, though we've mentioned anti-magic. But now she knows I can force an enemy miles away to come to battle. The only response he got was a slightly raised eyebrow and an acknowledging nod. Then she clasped her hands together and addressed all of the heirs. You have won a victory worthy of a song if any bard should hear of it. She flashed a private smile. If a Maelstrom ship has failed to kill us, no others will try. The maestro will have harsh words for Badud for sending one of his students to their death. She gestured back towards the body of the ship and the luxury accommodations within. We have much distance to travel before we reach the waters of Kehona, so let us celebrate our victory. The heirs took the next couple of weeks easy. They kept up their training but otherwise filled their time with idle conversation and Eolin's library. Nathan told a few thinly disguised stories from Earth, and though Eolin looked confused at times, she seemed to assume he'd merely come from a far-off corner of Davrar. They ate good food, enjoyed the sun and the sea and the minimal risk of death. It was a time to relax, to set down the burdens of responsibility and constant improvement for a moment. They'd been moving from battle to battle for a long time. The future would bring more battles, but it was time to step back from chasing the next development and enjoy life. Or else we'll burn out. You can't work all the time or you'll forget what joy is like. Nathan especially tried to forget about his woes. He was on a ship, and he couldn't do much until that ship got where it was going. He did his best to unwind, to have fun with his abilities instead of being constantly focused on honing himself to the sharpest possible edge for the next life-or-death fight. And he had to admit, soaring through the air far above the ship, and then falling out of the sky to dive into the ocean at near-terminal velocity was a lot of fun. He didn't even see anything that wanted to take a bite out of him. One morning, Eolin gave them an update on their progress. We should arrive in 2 days, though an escort boat will arrive soon to guide us in. After your deeds, your arrival is anticipated. She gave them a sharp, satisfied smile. Nathan nodded along and caught his friend's eyes meaningfully, jerking his head below decks. The heirs convened in one of the larger bedrooms just a short while later. They were still relaxed and joking around, but there was an air of seriousness that hadn't been there for the last several days. They all knew it was time to talk about serious topics. Nathan got them started. Stella, can you cast Muffle, please? I'll take care of magical eavesdropping. Sure and certain, she replied, casting the magic around the room. Nathan layered his aura over it, tuning it to make sure that Eolin couldn't eavesdrop through the ship. I don't know if she can actually do it, but I would definitely feel it if she tried. Saria Pamaris. Kachai's words were low, a dissatisfied rumble. May the third quester we meet be kinder than the first 2. Nathan nodded. Yeah, we should talk about how to handle that meeting. We need more of a plan than to just ask how to stop the endings. Sarah frowned, rolling a long rifle cartridge between her fingers. Eolin said Saria doesn't like the endings. What else can we do? My bones say she'll set us against the questers of Badud's grid, Arl said. Do we want to do that? He lifted his hands in an uncertain shrug. It's a worthy fight. Kachai shook his head. But that is not the path towards our goal. Our target is the endings. Our minimum aim must be to save Gemor from the ending of history, or at least delay it. We have 100 years, Sarah mused. Maybe we should be agents of Saria, gain her favor before asking for insights around the endings. I don't want to hide the cost of our service from a quester, Stella replied with a grimace. Or to serve one at all, but certainly not without mentioning our price. She could tell us the only way to stop the ending is to destroy all of Badud's works. Arl waved his hand. We wouldn't know the lie. Sure and certain we don't know enough to catch her in a lie, Sarah said. Though under Kachai's truth magic we would be more certain. The wolfman shook his head. She fought the gods. She knows more of divinity than I would she let me cast such magic on her. If she wanted us to follow her she would, Arl replied snidely. Sarah's voice grew heated. Are we a true treasure to her? She is a quester like Brock's. I bet dragon bones to stalk her teeth she's dealt with dozens, hundreds of teams of powerful adventurers. Nathan killed Badud, Stella said in a calm rebuttal. But now he's back and hiring mercenaries to sail across the oceans, Sarah retorted. Killing a quester isn't enough. They play games above our station. Nathan, Katja asked, having noticed that he wasn't contributing to the conversation. Speak your thoughts. Nathan blew air through pursed lips, emerging from his thoughts. He'd been listening to his friend's conversation with half an ear, but most of his attention had been on an internal question. Do I tell them about my suspicions of Davrar? About how I think the questers created Davrar itself as a setting for their game? It will probably change how we approach Saria. If anything will make her take us seriously, that will. The heirs were all watching him now, familiar enough with his mannerisms to know that he was about to say something important and that it would come in due time. Stella cracked a joke. Do you have another deep secret of Davrar to share? Ah, to hell with it. They deserve to know. Nathan gave a small chuckle. Yeah, I do. Hear me not again, Sarah groaned. They all looked at her and she raised her hands defensively. What? At this rate Nathan will become the god, not Kachai. The wolfman glared at her but didn't reply, instead turning his attention towards Nathan and cocking an eyebrow to urge him to continue. He acceded. I'm not sure about this, but I think that all of Davrar is a game and the questers are the players. Sarah nodded. Davian called it the games of questers. They control nations and play them off against each other, leading as champions. Her tone was untroubled, not understanding Nathan's underlying point. It's more than that, Nathan said. I think Davrar was created for the questers to play their games. That is the purpose of Davrar, why it exists. Kachai's brows drew down in bemusement, and the rest of the heirs looked similarly lost. Nathan did his best to explain. This world isn't something that forms naturally. A spinning cylinder with an artificial sun, monsters to fight and magic that cooperates with physical laws. And most of all, the system of Davrar, which encourages levels in power and rewards satisfying insights. It's too close to what somebody would design as a game. All of it is built for questers who can learn magic, fight monsters, build civilizations, and scheme against each other. It is our world, Kachai spoke simply. Why must it be artificial? It's too perfect, Nathan replied. Davrar is what somebody would design as a game, every part of it. This what of the endings? Stella's voice was small and a bit fearful. Game resets or expansions. Any game will get stale if it's the same for too long, and we know the questers control them from what Badud said. It sounds like Davrar has changed a lot over time. Monsters, gods, I bet dungeons didn't used to be common. Maybe they were created to set up the ending of history. Why would so many pieces of dangerous magic from so many different time periods survive this long? Why would the Adrani Empire tolerate dangerous ruins from the Kali's conclave or the Sklia's dominion mere miles from where they built their own fortresses? It doesn't make sense. The ending of elements could have unearthed them. Kachai's voice was uncertain, like he was trying the argument on for size and finding that it didn't fit. They're matched to the terrain, Arl replied. Fortresses on hills, towns in caves, towers atop mountains. Most dungeons have not been uncovered from where they were first built. Kachai breathed out a heavy sigh of acknowledgement and waved his acceptance of the point. What of the seals? Stella's eyes were troubled as she looked at Nathan. What is their purpose? Nathan gave a small shrug. Maybe defending them is an extra challenge for the questers who want to fight more monsters. He jerked his thumb upwards, indicating the sky above and the blight that was visible in the world above at night. Or if a quester doesn't want to fight other questers, they can fight to push back the corruption. Fighting to a seal during a solstice would take a team of heroes backed up by a nation but wouldn't entail fighting other people. In other words, that's the endgame PvE content. There was another moment of silence while the heirs chewed on Nathan's words. Then Kachai broke it. If the questers aren't from Davrar, where is their home? I don't know, Nathan admitted. I think they're from my universe because that's the simplest explanation, but it doesn't matter, they're not from Davrar. That's why Elin has never heard of somebody becoming a quester. Questers come from somewhere else. And they made Davrar, Kachai said, completing the thought as an angry light sparked in his eyes, darker than anything Nathan had seen in the Wolfman before. Smoke and blood. They made our world. They crafted it as one would lay an enchantment. He shook his head, not in denial but in disappointment. They have complete power and they chose to make monsters and dungeons and endings. His lips curled, exposing sharp canines. They are the greatest monsters of all. Fighting them would be a dungeon for fools, Stella replied uncertainly. They made Davrar, they control it, they can make the endings happen, the very system that gives us levels. We can't fight that. Sarah pursed her lips. Nathan killed Badud. We can fight them and win. That was him playing the game, Arl said caustically. If we try to stop the game, then they will stop playing and use Davrar itself to destroy us. We would be helpless. Nathan tapped a finger against his lips thoughtfully. Do we need to stop the game? What else could our target be? Kachai replied hotly, the light in his eyes an angry red that promised bloodshed. They play the game and we die. Without the game, Davrar wouldn't exist, Nathan replied calmly. Is this world so terrible that we should try to destroy it? A growl rumbled from Kachai's throat. If what you say is true, they send the endings upon us to avoid boredom. They create monsters because they are fun to fight, ignoring those times when the monster devours the innocent. Nathan raised a hand to forestall the Wolfman's tirade. They also made a magic system that can easily be used to dominate and enslave people. Davrar has problems. He met the fires in his friend's eyes with an even gaze. But we can try to fix the problems, or we can try to burn the whole thing down. One of those is possible, while the other leads to us fighting every single immortal quester on Davrar. But how do we change the game? Sarah's gaze was distant. We don't even know the rules. How can we change them? We learn. We find allies, Nathan said. We're already headed towards somebody we expect to be friendly. We talk to Saria and get her to help us. Arl sighed out a ragged breath. This is a prophecy of death. How do we do it? Changing Davrar is an impossible deed. Kachai stood, his armor clanking and beginning to shine with a faint inner light. It is what we swore to do. This is how we stop the endings. The light in his eyes had brightened from their bloody hue to a richer gold. This is a challenging path, but finally we see it laid out before us. There was a pause, then Sarah chuckled. A ghoul slain, but now a dragon rises in its place. Why would Saria help us? She's a quester who plays the game of Davrar. Elin said that Saria disliked the endings, Stella said, her lips pursed. Nathan nodded. We know there are a lot of questers, and some of them will definitely want Davrar to change in one way or another. It sounds like Saria is one of them, which means she could be sympathetic to us. We might not even need to convince the normal quester. There might be a smaller group that oversees how Davrar works. We might just need to convince them. Though they're more likely to be concerned with a bottom line than the ethical and moral stance of a game they're running. I don't know, I'm kind of hoping that any society that could build Davrar is post-scarcity. Or kill them, Arl said roughly. Nathan snorted. I don't think that will work, but maybe we just don't know enough until we talk to Saria. Should we tell her that we know Davrar is a game? Sarah asked, tension clear in her tone. She might kill us for that. Arl's mouth twisted wryly. Try to kill us. Nathan ignored Arl and replied to Sarah. I think we should. It will make her treat us seriously, but I'm not sure how we should approach that conversation. I want to talk to Elin first and try to get more information about Saria. This is a big decision and we need all of the information we can get. Let's also all think about it and try to talk about it again before we meet Saria. I will follow your light, Kache replied, pursing his lips at Nathan's words. It is only through your light that we have found this path. Now you must lead us along it. We must learn more, and we cannot do that without revealing what we suspect. We will follow your decisions. Great, Nathan agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. Now, let's talk about how we could change Davrar while keeping it fun for the questers. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com Chapter 45 Quester Gossip. After their discussion wound down, Nathan asked to have a private word with Stella. He'd been putting off talking to her about wizardry, partially because he wanted to take a break from crazy magical shenanigans. He'd been excited about magic his entire life, but recently it seemed like he'd been jumping from insane magic to insane magic, and he wanted a little bit of a break without manipulating the forces of reality. Which is insane. I think it's less that I'm tired of magic and more that I don't want to associate figuring out magic with facing life-or-death consequences. But the real reason was that he knew Stella would dive headfirst into wizardry the moment he gave her a hint in that direction, heedless of the fact that she had other skills she needed to work on and needed relaxation time of her own. Not to mention that if we play around with fire wizardry on the ship, then Elin will straight up murder us. The door closed behind the other heirs and Stella turned towards Nathan with a curious look in her eyes. What occurs? Nathan offered a hesitant smile. You asked me before about wizardry and I said I didn't know how to help you get there. Stella's interest sharpened to something nearly palpable, a faint glow kindling behind her eyes. Have you found the insight? His smile grew. No, but you did. Your Hydrabane spell, the part of it that uses fire to generate more fire mana, that is wizardry. Her brow scrunched up. It isn't. I understand how that magic works and all of its functions are based in mana. Nathan shook his head faintly. It's wizardry. You might not be able to sense it, but that spell touches on the core of wizardry, which is all about changing the rules of reality in a local area. In this case, you're making fire burn better and fuel its own spread more effectively. Stella looked at him expectantly, then realized he wasn't going to continue. Hear me, is that it? Can you give me anything else? He shrugged. Not really. I'm happy to help you figure out if you can recreate the effect with other spells, but I'm not entirely sure how you did it. This is your insight. I just wanted to tell you you've touched on the edge of it by yourself. Her expression grew introspective, then morphed into a proud smile. My own insight of fire wizardry. She fell silent, thinking through the spell. A truth of fire in oxidation. Her gaze snapped up to Nathan. When can we practice? He winced. After we arrive in Kahona. I don't want to burn down the ship or make Elin think we might. Stella's eyes went to their wooden and flammable surroundings. Ah, but we can fly out over the ocean and practice there. Only if you think you can practice without interfering with your fly spell. She nodded confidently. I will hit this target. Magic beyond what my parents could dream. Nathan wanted to wait a little while before talking to Elin, so it wouldn't be obviously linked to the heirs' private conversation. But they'd be arriving in Kahona in just a couple of days, so the next morning after breakfast he found her in the library. She was reading a book while curled up in an overstuffed armchair that rocked slightly with the motion of the ship. He pulled another chair over and sat down nearby, politely waiting for her attention. It was a few minutes before she tucked a bookmark into her book and set it down on a small table. She regarded him fondly. Your patience belies your power. It is a charming melody to be treated as an equal by somebody who has slain a quester, but acting below your station is to dance with folly. Nathan frowned at the formal speech and the message it contained. Should I be more demanding? You're carrying us across the ocean. That's not something I could do. Eolin's dark red lips curved upwards in a smile. It is about status and potential. I am old and wise, but there are others who can carry out my tasks. Few have the strength to shape the tune of nations as you have. Your deeds set you just below the questers, above many of the true powers of Davrar. Does that mean I need to treat everybody else like servants? Nathan wrinkled his nose at the thought. She shook her head in a quick motion. It means you will deceive many about your status. Kehona is a city of pride, where people wear their achievements on their person. To bear no markings of accomplishment designates you as having no accomplishments, or being so successful that all should know your deeds, or as being foreign and clueless, which is considered the same as having no accomplishments. Huh, Nathan said, processing that. What do these achievements look like? Does somebody award them? Eolin's mouth quirked in amusement. If only there was such a clear conductor. An accomplished farmer may wear a patch with 3 sheaves of grain to mark their contribution of 3 fields to the city granaries. A hunter may string the teeth of their kills around their neck, but the quickest path to mockery is to make a claim you have not earned. I'm not going to have idiots challenging me on the streets, am I? His words were tinged with irritation. Kehona does not duel, she replied, rolling her eyes. But people will be rude, shopkeepers will serve you last, and the guard will not side with you in disputes, she chuckled. All of this noise matters little. You are Saria's guest, and any occupant of the palace is treated with utmost respect by the people. They know why their city survives. He looked up curiously. So we'll be staying in the palace. Are we going to have to wait to talk to Saria? Eolin shrugged. The royal palace has a mighty guest wing, where Saria's agents are welcome between missions. Many enjoy the symphony of Kehona and move into the city, but the guest quarters are ever a place to find interesting people and swap treasures and insights. As for when you will meet Saria, I cannot say. Such is dependent on her schedule. As good an opening as any. What is she like? He kept his tone the same, interested and curious. Eolin cocked her head. I spoke of her before. She is a quester and fights against enemies that need fighting. Nathan waved that explanation away. But as a person, what is she like? Brox was arrogant and obnoxious, and I want to know what to be prepared for, and try to interpret how she's likely to react if we tell her what we suspect about Davrar. A sly smile spread across Eolin's face. I will speak of Saria if you first speak of Brox. I know his name but have never met him. Consider yourself lucky, Nathan deadpanned. We just freed Halsmet, which is one of the smaller cities of Giant's Rest, and then he strides in like he owned the place. Flowing hair, purple eyes, and with a social skill that would arouse the dead, if you know what I mean. He wiggled his eyebrows to help convey the meaning, and Eolin covered her delighted smile with a hand. His tone shifted from wry humor to old anger. He followed us out on a dangerous mission. He compromised an ambush we'd laid so he could be dramatic. That directly caused the death of several slave soldiers we'd meant to save. Then he tried to goad me into attacking a dungeon for no good reason. When I refused, he got mad and left to pursue his own excitement. He's vain, likes excitement, and gets annoyed when people don't immediately bow to his suggestions. Nathan ran a hand through his hair and let out a brief sigh. But before the first battle against Badud, he explained himself. He said that he's been doing this for a long time, many thousands of years. Going from war to be the hero that tips the tide when needed. His gaze was distant as he remembered Brox's words atop the mountain. He said that he had to be that way, that if he was respectful and serious it would break him eventually. The only choices were between being an annoying fool and not coming at all, and he came to help us. though it honestly may have all been an act. But he didn't say he'd be better, so I'm not sure it matters. I might respect him more, but I'm not going to let my guard down around him. He looked at Eilin again, seeing her pensive look. He fell fighting Badad after that. But before he died, Brox was able to wound Badad badly enough that he had to retreat to Giant's Rest. That let us win the battle and gave me time to dismantle the Ascendant Academy and become powerful enough to win the next time I fought Badad. Eilin considered that story for a moment. She dipped her head to Nathan in a gesture of respect. An honest song, and in respect for it I will speak of Saria. She acts the Grand Queen, the confident and proud leader of a confident and proud nation. She leaned a little closer, a conspiratorial smile on her lips. But in truth she is a scoundrel. Her eyes drifted upwards, looking at the distant past. A few hundred years ago I was caught smuggling dimensional bags into Esebis. My ship, the Singing Squall, was placed under guard and I was put in the harbormaster's jail before transfer to the debtor's prison. Then Saria broke me out. She smirked while remembering the past adventure. She was being chased by the guild elite and needed a ship from the city. We lost them at a theater brothel. Their attention passed over the two women dancing atop the table. Her attention came back to Nathan, a raised eyebrow daring him to make a comment. We escaped aboard my ship and were chased distances beyond reason. Whatever she stole was worth more than the ship sunk in pursuit. You don't know what it was? Nathan asked. He was surprised Eilin had agreed to carry cargo she didn't know about. Then again, it didn't sound like she'd had a lot of choice in the matter. I asked, and she told me it was a secret of Kali's. Eilin shook her head in a small measure of exasperation. By the singing bell, I believe the meaning is direct, and she stole a secret treasure made by the Kali's conclave before their fall. But that wealth is not the theme of this story. I spoke to Saria often on the journey back to Kahona. Eilin took a short breath before elaborating. She is a thief and a friend to the shadows. She is vicious to her foes and ruthless in gaining every advantage. But her spirit points true. Eilin's brows creased as she chose her words carefully. Saria hates needless cruelty and carries a deep fury towards the questers of Badad's grid. She seeks to spite them, and spoke often of spreading knowledge and law to make Davrar better. That's a good sign. If she wants to change Davrar to make people stronger, then she might want to change it to make it less deadly. Then Eilin's mouth quirked. After we left Esebis, Saria threw the identity enchantment of a man who groped her into the ocean. In Esebis, that enchantment carries your wealth and proof of your caste. It is impossible to steal, but questers do impossible things. She looked over at Nathan directly. Does this quench your question? He thought for a second. I think it does, thank you. He considered striking up small talk, but decided against it and got to his feet to leave. Eilin gave him a small smile, a joy shared. A few hours later, Nathan and Stella were floating in midair a few hundred feet out from the Grace of the Mists. She was working on distilling the core of the Hydrabane spell into the minimum components necessary for wizardry, while Nathan was giving feedback and snuffing out any unstable constructs. I think the part that spreads fire around is essential, he said. Fire spreads, that's what it does. Stella threw her hands up. That's not the logic of mana, it's more like Kachai's prayers. This is wizardry, not mana, Nathan reminded her. Then his head snapped up to scan the horizon. Something magical was reaching for them, coming from the direction of the dark blob on the horizon that they'd been headed towards the last few days, scrying magic of some kind. Somebody's looking for us. Let's get back to the ship. He turned on his heel and sprinted back to the Grace of the Mists, making for where Eilin lazed on her throne. He called out as soon as he was within range. Somebody's looking for us. Should I block the spell? She waited for him to reach the deck before shaking her head sharply. No. These are the waters of Kahona. They will find us and a patrol ship will guide us in. Her eyes hardened and swept in to take in all of the heirs who had gathered in response to Nathan's call. The watch in Kehona are beyond other city guards. Do not treat the law here as a gentle breeze. Bow before it or be snapped like a brittle branch. Nathan blinked. Okay, we'll play nice. The scrying spell latched on, and soon enough they were joined by a small and maneuverable boat without sails. It looked for all the world like a speedboat with an enchanted ballista mounted on the back. Magic propelled it through the water at high speed, though Nathan could tell that the enchantment wouldn't scale well to larger ships. It's probably not very stable in rough seas either. It looked like only a trio of people manned the boat, but they all moved easily even as their little craft bounced over the waves. One of them called over with a magically amplified voice. Eolin Mistweaver of the Grace of the Mists, be welcome in the territory of Kehona by the authority of Saria Pamaris. State your number of passengers and their status. It sounded like a rote question, something the man had asked hundreds of times before. Her response was calm and businesslike. 5 adventurers from a far-off continent come on Saria's invitation. We know of your personage and items. Are there any notable changes? Came his reply, the words nearly blending together with his clipped tone. No. Describe your passengers and their status along with notable items. Eolin's lips quirked in a smirk before she responded. A team of true power led by Nathan Questorkiller. Other members are Mage Stella Hydrabane, Markswoman Sarah Maelstrom Slayer, Cleric Kachai Godblist, and Fighter Arl Relic Thief. The heirs glanced around at each other and at Eolin in confusion, clearly uncertain what the names or titles meant. But their surprise was nothing to the reaction of the customs agents on the Kehona ship. Their heads all snapped up as one, the boredom of routine falling away in an instant to be replaced by shock. Eolin spoke into the ensuing silence. Was my answer heard? Shall I give it again? No, no, came the nervous reply, the man stuttering as he tried to get back on script. Any powerful items to declare? The heirs looked towards Eolin, who shrugged. They wish to know if you carry an item capable of destruction or corruption beyond your own powers. Speak the truth, but the titles I have given you mean that you should only need to declare items that are truly worthy of collies. The heirs looked around, shaking their heads. Then Arl snapped his fingers. I've got the blade of a quester here. He drew out the black-bladed sword they'd taken from Brock's, holding it out for a brief moment before sliding it back into his bag. And a few other weapons. That's a bit of an understatement, but I don't think anything measures up to Brock's sword in sheer potency of magical effects. Chapter 46. A view of civilization. The Sea Patrol kept them busy for a little bit longer, asking some more questions around the heirs' magical items. They didn't seem to care much about their destructive capacity, but rather the danger of some kind of magical plague or anything that could self-replicate. With just a few questions, they ferreted out the axe that could turn the target into an undead, but quickly clarified that it could only make a single undead at a time and the magic couldn't spread. Then they backed off a little ways, maintaining pace a few hundred feet away from the Grace of the Mists. That didn't seem like a very serious inspection, Nathan said, watching the little craft as it glided smoothly over the swells. They didn't seem worried about our skills much at all, just our items. You are with me and summoned by Saria herself. I have named you Questorkiller, and they do not wish to offend a guest of your status. Eolin dipped one shoulder in a shrug. They also hold a symphony of skills to detect danger before it enters the city. Kehona has masterful compositions of many paths, especially those related to defense. This city has stood through endings. It will not fall to a curse of Quaz. Kachai raised a bushy eyebrow. How many endings? That is a secret of Kali's. If the sayings are truthful, it was founded after the ending of Wrath, but that was long ago. That would mean it survived 3: storm, deicide, and elements. They stood in silence, watching the dark landmass up ahead grow more defined. They'd been sailing towards it for days without seeming to get much closer. But that was the effect of the curvature of Davrar. You could see things from very far away, and they'd get clearer as you approached once there was less atmospheric distortion. Now it was close enough Nathan could pick out some mountains as little bumps on the horizon. Eowyn broke the silence. "We shall arrive after the sun departs. If you wish to be well rested, there is time to nap." None of the heirs seemed interested, so Nathan spoke for all of them. "I'd prefer to see Kahona. It's not every day that you get to see a city this old." "When will we be able to see Saria?" Stella asked, fidgeting where she stood. "I don't know," Eowyn admitted easily. "Mayhaps tonight, more likely tomorrow, possibly next week. She is a quester." She spread her hands as if that explained everything. In a sense, it did. The heirs once again lapsed into silence, trying to pick out the city that had been their goal since they'd left Giant's Rest. Nathan caught a few glimpses of reflected light from where the landmass met the water, but it was too soon to say anything for sure. A couple of hours later, Eowyn clapped her hands and declared it was time for their final meal aboard the Grace of the Mists. She guided Arl through making a very fancy dish of shredded meat and roasted vegetables cooked together in little pie crusts. It looked like too much effort for the amount of reward, but Nathan was pretty sure Eowyn was just distracting them from staring at the horizon for hours on end. Night had fallen when they came back above deck, and the city of Kahona stood out in the darkness like a glimmering jewel. From afar it looked like a welcoming torch of civilization, a stark contrast against the soft glow of the world above. They could pick out more and more details as they approached, and Nathan's first thought was that it looked like a modern metropolis from Earth. "Those are skyscrapers." The heirs gasped as they got close enough to make out the towers that studded the city. The only building that tall they'd seen was the Ascendant Academy, and here there were dozens of them, packed tightly against one another. Nathan squinted to make out details, spending focus to sharpen his senses. Each of the buildings glowed with orange light eerily similar to the color of incandescent bulbs, but their profiles weren't quite right for a normal skyscraper. They were made of metal and glass, but each had a unique style. One had an Art Deco look that reminded Nathan of the Chrysler Building. Another was built with fluid lines that made it look like flowing water. A third looked like a fat cigar, and another like a Covenant spaceship from the Halo games. His inspection continued on to the rest of the city. Kahona seemed to be built high above the ocean, atop cliffs right up against the water. A wall prevented Nathan from seeing the base of the skyscrapers, but in the dark it blended into the natural rock, and he wasn't sure how much was cliff and how much was wall. Underneath the city a massive cave glowed with light. Nathan watched as a sailing ship was silhouetted against its mouth, dwarfed by the massive opening. The heirs were all transfixed by the sight, trying to understand the scale of the city. Stella spoke quietly, as if afraid of disturbing the view. "Dragon's breath." Nathan was busy doing calculations. He counted the number of buildings, then estimated the surface area of the city. "I count 47 towers. There might be more I can't see, but they're packed pretty tightly. Probably somewhere between 1 to 3 million people. About 10 to 30 times more than lived in Giant's Rest. 100 times more than lived in Gemor and all of the villages. It's a metropolis all right, but it's not beyond imagination. There could be more if there's a sprawl, but I wouldn't expect a city that's survived multiple endings to have suburbs." "A fine estimate," Eowyn said. "It is a city among cities, only challenged by the other places under the direct rule of questers like Esebus and Jark." "Is that the port?" Arl asked, pointing at the giant cavern underneath the city. "There aren't any waves." Eowyn gave a nod, teeth flashing in the darkness. "It is. The safest on Davrar and ruled by the strongest code of law as well, but we won't be using it." She pointed to the side, towards a promontory sticking out into the ocean. "That is Saria's palace." It wasn't as well lit as the rest of the city, which was why Nathan hadn't really paid it much attention until now. But the tall peninsula of land was covered with a collection of low-lying buildings that looked like spun sugar under the light from the world above. The city grew larger and larger as the grace of the mists approached, until the cliffs towered overhead. They were just under 1,000 feet tall with the walls on top. The entrance that led to the underground port was 500 feet tall and twice as wide at the opening. The massive cavern beyond was even larger, capable of holding a fleet. There weren't any waves. When Nathan stretched his senses into the water, he noticed a similar enchantment to what he'd felt in Litcliffe radiating out from the city ahead. Here it was more subtle and better tuned, gently suppressing and diverting the waves in a much larger radius instead of harshly cutting them off closer to the city. They didn't have to go through any gauntlet of rough water to transition from the deep ocean to the coast. The little patrol boat led the grace of the mists around the promontory that held the palace to reveal another underground harbor built into the back of the protruding cliffs. It also revealed the other side of Kahona and showed that the whole city was built atop an island standing a few miles away from the larger landmass of the continent. An unnaturally straight and even causeway connected the city to the mainland, with no fewer than 4 sets of walls along its length. Well, it has survived a while. I'm not surprised to see that it's so heavily defended. At just that moment, they passed through an invisible and intangible barrier that surrounded the city and stretched out miles in every direction. It existed like an enchantment written into the divide between the physical world and the metaphysical one where mana pools lived. Then it was gone, fading into the distance behind them. Nathan blinked, stretching his aura backwards to examine the construct, and seeing that it curved inwards in all directions like a giant sphere, well defended in more ways than one. He couldn't tell what the wizardry did. It was certainly interfacing with reality on an extremely deep level. He could tell it was changing some universal background constant within the bubble, but everything felt normal. The enchantments on the ship didn't seem to be behaving any differently either. Kachai noticed Nathan's puzzled look. The wolfman raised an eyebrow at him and tilted his head to invite an explanation. Nathan just shook his head and looked forward again. He didn't have a good enough idea of what was going on, and he wasn't about to ask that they turn around so he could examine it more closely, especially since people who couldn't feel wizardry couldn't even detect that it was there. They pulled into the smaller cave harbor. It was 10 times smaller than the main harbor, but still held docks and dry docks for about 20 ships. Only half of the berths were sized for the grace of the mists. It was quite late at night, so only a few people were around, moving cargo and doing other tasks. Eolin piloted them smoothly into the slot that their escort indicated, and the smaller ship turned around and sped off. One of the crew waved towards them, and Nathan waved back. The grace of the mists bumped gently into the stone pier. Eolin flicked a finger and ropes reached out to tie themselves to the moorings. She stood from her throne and clasped her hands formally in front of herself, then bowed to the airs. "I will carry the song of this journey for as long as I make music. You are pleasant companions and powerful allies. I hope prophecy calls for us to voyage together once again." Then her mouth quivered in amusement. "Though that might be soon indeed. If you listen to Saria's plans, then it is likely that I will carry you away from this city within the week." Kachai slammed a gauntleted hand against his breastplate in a gesture of respect. "We would be free of regret to travel with you again. May Algoa's luck ride with you." The rest of the heirs echoed the sentiment and then turned to the docks, where a trio of people waited for them. The first was probably a guard, dressed in enchanted armor complete with a face-covering helmet and a sheathed short sword. The second was a youthful woman dressed in a sundress, despite the chill wind coming off the ocean. The last was a stern-faced older woman dressed formally in something that wasn't far off from a suit. She stood at the head of the little group, gloved hands clasped together as she politely waited for them to approach. All three bore myriad little patches and emblems across their outfits, sewn or enchanted in place. Nathan didn't have a clue how to read them, but he was pretty sure that they noted various accomplishments. Given how many each person was wearing, they were being greeted by a prestigious group. He walked down the gangplank first, giving the formally dressed woman a polite nod and waiting for her to speak. "Speak your names and paths and be sheltered in this city." She spoke firmly and authoritatively. A strong mental skill reached towards the heirs and presented a clear choice. They could tell the truth or they could lie, and the woman in front of them would know if they lied or made significant omissions. Nathan Lark, Anti-Mage and Assassin. He spoke clearly and proudly, meeting the woman's eyes and daring her to judge him. She merely blinked in surprise, then shifted her attention to Kacha. The heirs spoke in turn. Kacha Cordavia, Cleric; Stella Caxal, Mage; Sarah Crusens, Markswoman; Arl Crusens, Fighter. After each one, the woman dipped her head infinitesimally before moving on to the next person. When they were done, she gave them a light bow. "Thank you for your honesty." She reached into a pocket where an enchantment flashed before withdrawing 5 thin plates of metal, each about the size of a credit card. They were all etched with the heirs' faces and names, as well as their paths, and then a brief string of dots and dashes that looked a bit like a QR code. This really is a city of bureaucracy. These are your identification chits. Keep them on you at all times and show them when asked by an official or shopkeeper. Nathan noted the minor enchantments on the items and grimaced. Their magic wasn't very strong. It looked like some kind of preservation spell that would break if the chits were altered, as well as a divination beacon of some kind. It would be a pain in the ass to carry the chit around without stripping the magic from the enchantment. He gestured. "I can't carry that. The magic will break. Anti-Mage, remember." The woman glowered at him with the air of a bureaucrat whose routine had been interrupted. The younger woman wrung her hands nervously and the guard sighed heavily. "Can I carry it for him?" Arl asked, stepping forward and reaching out a hand for the cards. The frown didn't go away but did lessen as she handed Arl the cards. "Only if you stay with him. These chits prove your lawful presence in the city. If you cannot provide it when asked, you will be arrested." Arl nodded, passing out the cards to the rest of the heirs before storing his and Nathan's in his bag. The woman wasn't done. "Do you have any goods to declare?" The skill reached out for them again, requesting the truth. "Wow, customs." The heirs looked confused and Nathan sighed. "She means, do we have anything valuable we intend to trade with?" "Oh, yeah, a few things." Arl reached into his bag and pulled out a handful of gems that glowed with inner light. Primed magical gems, 24 mithril ingots, some orichalcum potion ingredients. He looked up at the woman with a raised eyebrow. Her mouth pursed again. "Enchantment and alchemy supplies miscellaneous." "Approximately how much by weight?" Arl shrugged and opened up one of his dimensional bags to peer inside. "A few £100. We looted a city." That answer did not serve to soothe the woman's nerves, and she leaned forward aggressively. "Do you have any soul dust, death's essence, liquid pain?" She continued to name a few dozen other ingredients that all sounded unsavory. Arl glanced into his pouch again. "No," he did not sound certain. The customs agent looked positively angry. "We will have to do a full check." "You will." She was interrupted by a cough from the woman in the dress and looked back. The younger woman gave her a meaningful look, then tilted her gaze upwards towards the palace above. The suited woman gave an angry sigh, then turned back to the heirs. She spoke through gritted teeth. "By invitation of Her Majesty, Saria Pamaris, Questor of Kahona, you are welcome in the city beyond endings. Break no laws during your stay." She moved aside grudgingly. The other woman stepped up to fill the gap and smiled brilliantly at them. "My name is Molithry. If it suits your desires, would you follow me?" She turned and led the heirs down the dock, turning back to give them another grin once they'd gotten out of earshot. "My worthiest apologies. You must understand that the border guard are serious in their duties." She turned to meet Nathan's eyes, an amused look on her face. "But be confident that you are truly welcome here." This felt like a true welcome, not the half-hearted one the border agent had given. Nathan returned the smile. "Thank you." He followed Malathri towards what looked like a magical elevator bank in the back wall of the giant cavern. Chapter 47. The city beyond endings. The row of metal doors in the wall turned out to be exactly like an elevator bank, and Malathri ushered them into a filigreed metal box that buzzed with enchantments. Nathan's magical senses could pick up the enchantments on the box and how they interfaced with the enchantments on the shaft. Notably, he could tell that this level wasn't the bottom. The elevators went down underneath the ocean, and the only thing holding them up right now were the enchantments on the wall. He made sure his aura was good and compressed. He didn't want to drop the airs down into whatever subterranean dungeon was present here, and he wasn't quite confident enough in his control of his aura to not accidentally break something in such a complex mess of magic. Their guide pushed one glowing button of many on the wall, and they began rising. A little light tracked their progress as it moved up from a button labeled Docks, past buttons marking different armories and vaults, several practice halls and a transit road, and towards the button labeled Lower Palace. Above that were Upper Palace and Palace Spire. They were all distracted from their examination as another set of enchantments came to life, and the walls of the elevator car flickered into invisibility. The walls beyond must have been similarly enchanted, since they could see clearly over the port and out the opening into the nighttime waters beyond. Malathri smiled indulgently as the heirs stepped towards the wall to watch the port drop away beneath them. The grace of the mists grew small, and Nathan felt a pang of nostalgia. Their time on the ship had been interrupted by the run-in with a ship full of mercenaries and a giant sea monster, but on the whole it had been one of the more peaceful and stress-free periods he'd spent on Davrar. He'd had a good time sailing across the ocean, too. Then their view was replaced by solid rock, and the walls flickered back to opacity. They turned back to the young woman, and Nathan asked the question that was on everybody's minds. "Are we going to see Saria? You would be wise to sleep first." Their guide was still smiling, but now it was more polite. "You're placed well on the list, but do not carry emergency status. If she judges it worthy, she'll see you tomorrow. How soon she sees us is an indicator of how much she cares, or maybe it's all games. I killed her rival, even if it didn't stick. She cares, and if she delays it's because she's making a point." The doors slid open moments later, and the heirs exited into a grand entry hall. It was a huge and empty space, but the walls were made of warm wood and tall, heatless flames danced on the chandeliers above them. The whole ensemble gave the room a comforting and warm feeling. It was rather the opposite of the vibe Nathan had gotten from the Ascendant Academy, where everything was cold marble and pale frescoes. "Your rooms are on the Citaview side. Breakfast occurs in the gardens beyond those doors." Malathri glided over the wooden floors, giving them a brief tour as she led them towards their room. "Or you can simply request food in your rooms. That may be wise before you meet with Saria. Many of the other guests will seek to determine your status before your deeds are known." Nathan tentatively extended his magical senses over the building. He knew this was the active home of a quester, and likely to be better defended than most places he'd visited. What he found reminded him of the Ascendant Academy again, but in a whole different direction. There was magic and wizardry laced through the entire structure, but it didn't feel alive and active in the same way the Academy had been. There were certainly security and detection enchantments, but they weren't integrated into a whole unit. Wizardry ran through the structure to reinforce it and trigger an alarm if anything was damaged, but there wasn't a will behind it. I'm also pretty sure this palace isn't conjured via wizardry. No, wait, some parts are. Those doors, the roof of this gallery. If it pleases you, here is your suite. This is the panel to alert the staff of your desires, food or cleaning or simple guidance. Malithri waved a hand and the doors opened, revealing a sumptuously decorated common area with an attached kitchen and several doors leading off of it. Here are your keys. She presented them with a set of enchanted spikes that looked to fit into a hole on the front of the doors. Are we allowed to leave? Sarah asked, tilting her head at Malithri. She giggled. Doubt not, you are not prisoners. You should stay in the palace until your meeting with Saria. We can find you inside the palace with ease when it is time, and the trip to the city would take time. She shrugged languidly. Be courteous and do not bypass locked doors or guards, and you will observe your guest obligations. May you dream of triumph. She left, the doors swinging shut behind her with only a faint click as the lock engaged. The heirs looked around at each other, then Kachai blew out a long breath. Kehona, it is not what my imagination showed. It's thousands of years old, Arl said thoughtfully. They guard against threats that we've never fought, against enemies who are long dead just in case another tries the same kind of attack. Stella flopped onto one of the couches. Well, their couches are very comfortable. Maybe I'll sleep here tonight. The rest of the heirs spread out to explore their suite, expressing their appreciation for the novel and advanced comforts. Sarah was particularly enamored with the enchantment that could replace the walls of the shower with an illusion of a thunderstorm or the inside of an erupting volcano. None of it worked for Nathan, and he had to tiptoe around to avoid breaking any of the myriad enchantments. They were everywhere, and his aura wanted to break magic. He could make it allow certain magics, but it required a sliver of attention he couldn't maintain in his sleep. I guess I'm sleeping on the ground again tonight. At least the carpet is soft and also enchanted. Well, if we pile enough bedrolls up, it shouldn't be a problem. Kachai called them all back to the common area. We should discuss our final approach to meeting Saria. He gestured for them all to sit, then turned to Nathan. Can you ensure discretion? He flickered his eyes to the walls. Nathan pursed his lips and nodded. He reached out to the enchantments around them, interrogating the function of every single one to find any that were focused on eavesdropping and surveillance. He didn't find any. There were enchantments to control the temperature, to facilitate the plumbing, and to allow illusions to be projected on various walls, but he couldn't see any that were geared towards spying on the occupants of the suites. Nathan furrowed his brow in concentration. He closed his eyes and dug deeper, parsing through the wizardry that flowed through the palace. I figured out the wizardry of the Ascendant Academy. This is not beyond me. If I were trying to hide a surveillance enchantment, where would I put it? The first layer of wizardry was exactly what it appeared, a layer of protective magic that reinforced the physical structure, making it harder to damage the palace. The second layer was similar, but worked on the enchantments instead of the physical structure. The magic of the palace would be more resistant to tampering and would also self-repair over time. It wouldn't stop him, but it would help against most other forms of magical tampering. He couldn't find anything beyond that. As far as Nathan could tell, there wasn't any detection magic in their suite at all. In fact, some of the larger-scale enchantments on the building seemed to be geared to prevent eavesdropping of any kind. Mystical discernment 4 achieved. I don't think there's anything spying on us, Nathan reported. The building itself repels divination, actually. We're safe. I'm still casting a muffle, Stella said. After she'd finished, she turned her attention towards Nathan. You're lighting the way. You've spoken to Eilin. What is your plan? Nathan chewed on a lip. I think we should be pretty straight with her. From what Eilin said, she's better than Brox. It sounds like she cares about her people and makes decent plans to accomplish her goals. We want to work with her, and lying is a bad way to start that relationship. But will she be direct in her dealings with us? Arl asked with a frown. If we tell her everything, then she could shape our path easily. Stella shook her head. She knows so much more than us. There's nothing we can do to know if she's lying. Hear me, I'd like to be able to trust her, but we can't know if she's worthy of trust so easily. Maybe there is a way. Sarah's voice was hesitant. Eilin claimed no knowledge of any deal Saria made with Badad about the ending of history. What Saria says about it will tell us much. Nathan could see where Sarah was going. We just ask her if Badad can move the ending up like he threatened. If she admits to making the deal, then we know she's being straight with us. If she's manipulating us, then she'll hedge. She might pretend he was able to do it on his own, or that he made a deal with another grid. The more he thought about it, the more he liked that idea. That's a great way to tell if she's going to treat us like people or pieces on a game board. Arl nodded slowly. If she's sincere, we gain a true ally. If she's not, then we know that we are being misused. Katja sighed heavily. But even if she lies, we will still move at her command if the command is just. She is our only option. We could go back to Agman, Stella said. We know there's another quester there. We know it belongs to another quester, Sarah corrected. Ushia Mur. She may not be there, and she is part of Saria's grid. We would be fighting the same foe. Arl gave a brief chuckle. We are also enemies of Agman, and I don't want to have to do the sea voyage again. We just got off the ship. We know of other great cities, Kache said thoughtfully. Esebus, Sangrad, Jark. We could find questers there. Esebus and Jark belong to other questers from Badad's grid, Nathan replied. We could fight them, but I doubt they'll give us answers. I don't know about Sangrad. He shook his head. Saria is our best bet. We have an introduction. We've done her a favor. There's every reason to believe that this can work out well. We just need her to think that we're worth treating like allies, not mushrooms. Mushrooms? Katja asked, confused. Kept in the dark and fed shit, Nathan answered wryly before getting serious again. I think telling her we think Davrar is a game is the key there, but I need to be careful not to be too aggressive about it. My bones say we make Nathan do all of the talking. Arl leaned back on the couch. This is not my battlefield. Nor mine, Kachi agreed. Can we ask to use a blessing of honesty? Nathan tilted his head back and forth. I don't think it's worth it. If we open with that, it's as good as saying we don't trust her. But we don't trust her, Stella protested. But if that's how we start, she'll never trust us. Besides, she's a thief and a rogue. She might have skills or artifacts that let her lie, even to one of your blessings. If anybody can do that, it's going to be a quester. That's a better argument, Sarah said, nodding along. Are there any other targets? I want to go use that shower. There wasn't anything else, so the heirs split up to enjoy the luxuries of the suite and get some rest in preparation for their meeting with the quester. Nathan had trouble going to sleep. He was examining every facet of what was going to happen in the upcoming meeting, thinking through his conversational lines, and trying to predict what Saria might ask him. He decided he'd explain about Earth if she asked, but not bring it up unless she asked, or unless she asked him to provide context for why he thought Davrar was a game. That's just a lot of ground to cover. It feels like a distraction, though it might help explain to her why I'm so convinced. Maybe I'll hint at it, try to get her to ask. Eventually he realized it wasn't just preparation that was keeping him up. It was straight nerves. He was more anxious now than he'd ever been for any test or presentation in his life. Well, that makes sense. What's funny is I'm more nervous about this than any of the battles too. Eventually he decided to go out and meditate on the balcony. He could look out over the city from there and just spend a few minutes appreciating the lights and color of Kehona. It was late at night, but the city was far from asleep. The glow from the city competed with the world above, and Nathan found it soothing. It was the largest city he'd found on Davrar, and it reminded him of Earth in an important way. There is civilization here, and it's not all slavers and imperialists. After that, he went back inside and was able to fall asleep quickly on the mound of unenchanted bedrolls and blankets. He slept without dreams. The next morning he woke feeling more relaxed than expected. He could smell food, and made his way into the common area to find the heirs picking over a large platter they'd had delivered. It was new to them but somewhat familiar to Nathan, who recognized fried fish when he saw it. It was even paired with fried slices of a starchy vegetable that reminded Nathan of potatoes. Fish and chips for breakfast. Maybe I should retract the comment about them being civilized. They didn't have to wait long after finishing breakfast for a knock. Stella gestured and the door opened, revealing Malithri. She wore a similar dress to yesterday, though this time in white and gold. She bowed. "If it suits your desires, I will take you to Saria now." The heirs were all ready to go and followed their guide through the palace, seeing other people passing by now and then. Nathan had been expecting Malithri to lead them to the elevators to go up the palace spire, but instead she took them into a wide courtyard that was filled with a dense forest. It looked too wild to be cultivated but too beautiful to be natural. A series of winding paths made of natural stone disappeared into the woods, and they walked down one of those to find a small clearing. In the clearing was a circular table made of rough wood, surrounded by a series of nicely carved wooden chairs. Water dripped off the trees around them, creating a pleasant background noise. Eilin sat in one of the chairs on the far side of the table, fingers steepled in front of her chin and red eyes watching the heirs as they came in. Her painted mouth quirked upwards, but she stayed silent. Next to her sat a smaller woman with short hair in a pixie cut. She was dressed casually in a long-sleeved sweater with a high neck and a leather jacket. The lack of adornment stood out next to Eilin's pale white skin and crown of blackened branches, but the woman moved with absolute confidence and naturally commanded the entire space. She gave them a professional smile, a simple upturn of the lips that served its purpose in letting them know they were welcome, then swept a hand towards the seats before her. "Please, sit. I'm Saria and there's much to discuss." Chapter 40. A comfortable conversation. The heirs took their seats, examining Saria while they did so. She wasn't an imposing woman, dressed in a somewhat battered leather jacket and without any obvious accessories apart from a nose stud and an unobtrusive necklace holding a multicolored stone. Nathan wouldn't have looked twice if he'd spotted her in a coffee shop back on Earth. His magical senses put the lie to that particular impression. She wore nearly a dozen enchanted items that meshed with each other well enough to present a united front of magical signatures. He avoided narrowing his eyes as he habitually started figuring out what the various enchantments did. Her jacket would shrug off blows better than Arl's armor and could change into almost any type of garment she desired. The tiny rings in her ears would dramatically enhance her senses, and the stud in her nose carried potent healing magic. She carried daggers up each sleeve whose signature reminded Nathan of the black-bladed sword Arl had taken from Brock's, and small dimensional bags with potent enchantments rested at the small of her back and in each boot. The real treasure seemed to be the stone on her necklace, which carried the signature of a divine protective enchantment that reminded Nathan of the shielding magic Katja and Kia used, but as powerful as the artifact that had destroyed the Ascendant Academy. There were a dozen other effects on her person, but he didn't have time to go through them all. Luckily, she hadn't been waiting for him to speak. As soon as the heirs finished adjusting themselves, Saria gave them an acknowledging nod. "I'm glad for your presence. Eilin spoke of your journey, and it was more exciting than my prophecy would have said, but you triumphed nonetheless. You pushed through Badud's revenge to stand before me, and he further weakened himself in the attempt. Assassins from Jark mean that he begged agents from Ammo, and ships from the Maelstrom are expensive purchases." Her attention narrowed from all the heirs to Nathan in particular. "But you, Nathan Lark, are a treasure amongst a dragon's horde. You carried the battle after Brox was slain. You slayed Badud to avenge him and destroyed the slave state of Giant's Rest." She wrinkled her nose at the mention of Giant's Rest as if it gave off a foul odor. Truly a victory worthy of any quester. Nathan dipped his head to accept the praise but spoke up to correct the record. I didn't kill Badad to avenge Brox. I did it because he was trying to conquer Gemor. My team was involved in bringing down Giant's Rest. He gestured to his friends sitting on either side. Saria's gaze remained fixed on him, a polite smile on her face. Eowyn tells me you have many advanced insights. Tell me, where are you from, Nathan? The question was quiet, but spoken like it carried a great weight. She knows there's something there. It's time to take the leap. It's not a giant secret anyway. All she'd need to do is ask around Gemor. The airs tensed, but Nathan smiled back wryly. I'm not from Gemor. Heck, I'm not from Davrar. He let that hang for a moment, drawing a shocked look from Eowyn and a raised eyebrow from Saria. The quester's eyes jumped around the room, scanning the airs before refocusing on his face. Is that verified truth? You're not a quester unless I am much mistaken. He smirked and nodded. I was summoned from my home by some kind of dimensional magic. It was cast by one of Badad's proteges, an archmage of Giant's Rest named Tldho Droxal. Did Badad command this? Saria was laser-focused, obviously hoping for a specific answer. No, Nathan replied, and Saria exhaled in disappointment. He was surprised to learn of it. I think Tl was operating on his own initiative for that. He kept trying to capture me after I escaped, likely because Badad told him to. I killed Tl before meeting Brox. Saria's expression softened, and her voice became gentle. It grieves me to hear that you were kidnapped to Davrar. Would you tell me of your home? Nathan nodded, brows scrunching together as he thought about how to describe Earth, especially to somebody he suspected of coming from a much more advanced civilization than what existed on Davrar, the third planet of a yellow dwarf star. I was a scientist working towards the highest degree my world offered in the study of life. He met Saria's eyes as he said it, watching for her reaction. Both of Saria's eyebrows shot towards her hairline and she leaned forward to examine him again. That breaks some mysteries. She tilted her head as if to study him from a new angle. Your world. It would please me to hear the state of it. What's a 3-sentence summary of Earth? What is she interested in? Probably population, level of government and technological progress. Population of 8 billion, globalized trade but no world government. A few simmering conflicts held in place by mutually assured destruction. Space capable but haven't expanded off our world. He let that hang for a moment. Yet, Saria's lips twitched in response. An astute answer, but not one relevant to Davrar. She glanced sideways at Eowyn, who looked completely lost, and then at the heirs, who weren't completely following Nathan but weren't looking at him in shock either. She gave a small nod. This is the source of your insights, Nathan shrugged. Pretty much. I have a lot of ideas about how Davrar could be better. Let's see if I can guide her to talking about how she wants to change Davrar. The quester smirked at him. So do most questers. Your world doesn't have endings. Is that why you wish to stop them entirely? Kahona is safe from the dangers of the endings. Nathan's eyes turned hard. But the rest of Davrar isn't. Millions, trillions die in every ending. He gestured upwards, towards the sky beyond the mossy branches overhead. Davrar is the size of 10,000 worlds, and the endings kill most of the population each time. The people here live lives of danger and violence and can barely build up to prosperity and peace before the endings crush them down again. His attention was locked onto Saria, and he was only just able to prevent his next words from being an accusation. Before I killed him, Badad taunted me with the ending of history. He said he would make it happen in 100 years. Is that something he can do? Do questers control the endings? Now to see her answer. If she deflects, then she's not going to play it straight with us from here on out. Saria grimaced as if she'd bitten into something sour. I made a deal with him to start the ending of history early on your continent. It will begin in 79 years. There will be a period of transition for it to fully commence, but within 100 years all of the cities will be destroyed. I am truly sorry." She stopped talking, watching Nathan and the heirs as their expressions tightened. Nathan took a moment to restrain his anger and stop himself from snapping. He wasn't entirely successful, and his voice was flat and demanding. "What did you get for it?" The quester exhaled a deep breath and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table and clasping her hands together. "3 continents of our choosing and a millennium and a half of non-aggression from Badud in particular. Pieces in a game." Kachai's voice was nearly a growl. Saria raised her hands. "It was the correct decision, and much to justify it. We would have fought for those continents until the ending of history came, and then they would have fallen and death spread across the land. Now we can enforce peace across those lands, cleanse the dungeons and build them up such that more than a fragment will survive the ending of history. They will become bastions of peace and civilization, through this ending and beyond." She met Kachai's angry gaze. "Your victory didn't carry the reward you desired, but it saved 3 entire continents. I know it is a caustic burn, but it was a worthy trade. I doomed 1 underpopulated continent that would have died regardless in exchange for 3 that have a hope of holding strong through the next ending." She pressed her lips together tightly. "It was not a just decision, but it was a necessary one. If I do not make choices like that, then more shall die and I would have been able to save them." "Do you disagree, Cleric of Damon?" Kachai breathed out a shaky sigh and shook his head wordlessly, breaking eye contact with her. Arl spoke up next. "Didn't Ushia control Agman? Did you abandon them too?" The quester nodded sharply. "We did. They were intended to hold back the influence of Giant's Rest, not conquer the continent. But now the continents of Valadra, Curacin, and Serona may have a future." Nathan buted in. "You seem to be focused on mitigating the damage from the endings. Is that the primary goal of your grid? We also seek to guard our territory and attack Badud's grid." Saria's lip curled. "Their idea of civilization deserves being burnt to the ground so something better can grow from the ashes, but often both activities are the same. I wish to discuss the nation of Sangrad with you. It is likely where Badud fled to. If he truly is weakened, then it would be primed for." Nathan held up a hand to halt Saria's proposal. He could see Eowyn tense as he interrupted the quester, but he hadn't given way to Brox, and he wouldn't to Saria. "Help me understand why you're working to make civilizations survive endings when you can move them around. Could you stop them?" Eowyn burst in, answering before Saria had a chance to respond. "The endings are a truth of Davrar, the one power that cannot be defeated. The only melody is to build civilizations that can survive them." "Then help me understand how you can change their timing but can't stop them," Nathan replied, keeping his eyes locked with Saria. She looked away, sighing and running her hands through her short hair before responding. "The endings can be moved, but their happening is sure as prophecy. They are a part of Davrar, and no grid has the power to stop the endings. But all of the questers together do." Nathan's words were soft but direct. They cut across the conference table like a knife. Saria's attention rotated back to him, her entire mien deadly serious. "What insight stirs that belief?" "Because Davrar was created and is maintained to entertain the questers," Nathan said bluntly. "There may be a group that controls it, but you know who they are, and if all of the questers demanded a change, you could make it happen." "It would, wouldn't it?" Saria spoke under her breath, the words bitter. Then she addressed Nathan more normally. "Should this be a meeting between us alone?" She glanced towards Eowyn, whose mouth was slightly open. The white-clothed and black-crowned woman seemed like she might not be breathing. Nathan shrugged. "My team has my trust." Saria's frowned slightly. "Eowyn, I seek your pardon for withholding these secrets. They are matters of the questers, and I will explain it to you later. For this moment, you may take your leave so that I may speak of things that should not be known." It was phrased pleasantly, but it was a command nonetheless. Eolin's mouth closed and she pressed her lips together hard enough they whitened before standing. She clasped her hands together in front of her breast and bowed over them. Then she turned on her heel and strode away rapidly. Saria sighed as she watched the woman go. I mislike rewarding her so poorly for her service. She is a stalwart ally and has completed many missions for me. Then why don't you trust her with this? Stella asked, genuinely curious. Saria's frown deepened. Because this conversation reaches for deep secrets, things that should be known only to the questers, not for the importance of the secret but because it would serve no purpose and would only cause her pain. She looked up at Nathan with a troubled expression. Or such was my thought. Tell me, what do you assume is the origin of Davrar? You're a multiplanetary civilization, Nathan said bluntly, referring to the questers as a whole and watching Saria for tells. She seemed to understand what he was saying, so Nathan kept going. Davrar might be a simulation, but I think it's more likely that it's a giant spinning cylinder or spindle with some very advanced technology to make the system of levels and talents work. He shrugged. It's a game for you. Entertainment. You're so far beyond all of this. He waved around to include the forest and the palace beyond, that for it to have meaning you need to give it an artificial context. I don't even know if you have physical bodies anymore, and Davrar is a place to have that. To have something that matters for people who are beyond worrying about anything. Like Brox, who just loves being the knight in shining armor coming to the rescue. It provides him an excuse to act shitty the rest of the time, and lets him play the tortured hero whenever he gets confronted about it. Saria gave a dark chuckle. You speak with such conviction and strike terribly close to the truth. She sat and thought about it for a moment, then waved her hand as if to banish the thought. Davrar isn't solely entertainment, but the difference isn't really important. She studied him again, and this gaze was much more intense than anything she'd subjected him to before. Saria had been responsive and engaged before, but now she'd gained an extra edge that told Nathan that he truly had her full attention for the first time. The quester addressed him seriously now. You've uncovered a truth of Davrar you were never meant to find. What's your desire? There is no reward for this insight. You cannot simply declare that Davrar is a game and change that game to your liking. Nathan had a ready reply. We want to end the endings, and the way we do that is by learning how the game of Davrar is run, then doing what's necessary to change it. I don't expect it to be easy, but this is the quest we set for ourselves. Is removing the endings all you desire? Saria asked with a raised eyebrow. She didn't seem judgmental, but something about her demeanor told Nathan that this was a test. She wants to see if I'm an idiot tilting at windmills, or if I'm following my moral compass to its logical conclusion. No, I also want to remove mental magic and things like unbreakable magical contracts. Nathan's brow creased as his thoughts ranged further afield. Davrar creates and then kills people for your amusement. That is. He looked up to Saria. How do you justify that? She nodded as if satisfied and seemed undisturbed by his challenge. Without Davrar, those people would never exist at all. They owe it their existence, and that existence isn't required to be a paradise. Then her tone became sharp. But we are in accord on the vileness of mind magic. That evil should never have been part of Davrar. Nathan had to stop for a moment and think about that. I don't like it. If you create people, you have the responsibility to make their lives decent. But what now? Do I flip the table on this discussion? Or do I accept that I'm not going to give every living being on Davrar a utopian ending and take what I can get? I need to move on for now and reevaluate this question later. Maybe after I've learned what I need to know. He looked back up at Saria and swallowed back bile. Okay, can you help me change that, make Davrar better for the people who live in it? She leaned in closer, smiling and offering her hand to him. Yes, I can. We may not achieve your goals of the endings, but I will help you make Davrar a more humanist place. He reached out and clasped the offered hand. It's a place to start. What do we do first? Epilogue. Brox pulled out the buzzing rock. Many years ago he'd had it carved with a remarkable likeness of Saria's scowl. It vibrated aggressively, and he watched it carefully to see how long it would buzz for. The Elothian rangers he was with looked back at him with tight faces, each concerned by the noise but unwilling to tell him to his face to be quiet. After all, they were hunting dangerous prey. Brox had asked for something exciting, and they'd taken him to hunt dragon wolves. The rangers wanted to surprise the fire-breathing predators, but Brox knew that wouldn't work. Catching creatures like this by surprise was a fool's game. Besides, he didn't really feel like lying still for hours in the attempt. That being said, he didn't much feel like abandoning Alothia right now. He'd been looking forward to hunting the dangerous wildlife that abounded on this continent. He'd start small, with prey like the dragon wolves, then ramp up to bigger game. He'd been looking forward to going up against one of the hill boars, but the rock in his hand continued to vibrate, and after the fifth pulse he looked up at the rangers who'd accompanied him and swore. "Quenfi's flaming teats, you'll have to finish this hunt without me. Stalk silently and all that." He didn't wait for a response before dashing away, the brush of the forest crackling with the speed of his movement. As soon as he was out of sight, he activated his teleport and appeared in the conference hall Saria preferred for important chats amongst her grid. The room was made of enchanted glass and lay far beneath her palace, protruding out into the waters of the ocean. Monsters swam around them, lured to the life of the port but unable to breach the enchantments that kept them below the surface. Similar enchantments protected this room, giving Brox a close-up view of several monsters he'd love to fight. He breathed out and turned towards the table in the center of the room. Only Saria was present, and she gestured him towards his place, where an enchanted goblet filled with opalescent liquid waited. Brox's eyebrows rose. "You opened a bottle of the sungold." He walked over and picked up the chalice, letting the vapors waft up and caress his skin like fingers of sunlight. "I did," Saria replied. She took a careless gulp of the millennia-old and utterly irreplaceable liquor, then gave him an irritated look. "Because of your mistake." He took a gentle sip, letting the effervescent light move up his sinuses before evaporating into his brain. "By Ada's, what's got you upset now? Was it what I did in Itonia? Those seers exist to be used, and look at where it took me, and it can't be Gemor. I know the prizes that bout earned." He waggled his finger at her. "We're winning this conflict now. Is that what this is about? How to capitalize on that victory?" "My victory?" Saria shook her head and sighed. "No, but we should wait for our companions before discussing it." Garna appeared next, and Brox saluted the androgynous woman with his glass, noting the sheaf of organized papers she carried. She hurried over to the table and plopped them down, brandishing an enchanted quill at the other questors like a weapon and speaking in a clipped tone. "We must be as fast as the dawn. Since the deal with Susu, I am overwhelmed in my attempt to consolidate Estefar and move it onto the correct path." She noticed the chalice waiting beside her and blinked, then looked up at Saria. "Is this a celebration of our victory? We have not led a new continent through the ending yet." Saria glowered at the gathering over her goblet. "No, there's something more important than that." That comment made Garna shoot Saria a suspicious look. What could be more important? This is our chance to win a lasting victory. A deep chuckle rolled through the room as their fourth member arrived, Ushia's massive frame striding into view. She pulled out her oversized and heavily padded chair and settled into it delicately, idly picking up the chalice of sungold and sipping it with relish. "I have been anticipating this taste gladly. Tell us why I've stoked your anger before Ushia spills it," Brox demanded jokingly with a smile on his face. "I'd like to see you yell at me after the victory I delivered." "The man from Gemor, the one who killed Badud," Saria prompted him. Brox nodded. "Nathan, a good fighter and a good counter to mages. He seemed hesitant to me, but I cannot call him a fool. He did kill Badud. You plan to recruit him into your stable of agents, yeah?" Did you fail? Saria rolled her eyes in his direction. What you failed to report for us is that he's not from Davrar at all, but a world from the universe beyond. They sound like they're on the cusp of being contacted. Brox blinked a few times. Truly, he leaned back and blew a raspberry. I knew he wasn't of Gemor. For a time I thought he could be a new quester recently come to Davrar, but he's from another world entirely, a place beyond the distal expansion. He leaned forward and rested his elbows on the table. That must be a tale, to arrive alone and confused and rise to such power. He clenched one fist. What a man! His hesitance is revealed for wisdom, as it must be born of caution won from experience. Is he here? I should congratulate him anew on his accomplishment. I wonder if he has any of my gear. Saria frowned at the man. He's above, but you won't be speaking with him. I don't think they're enamored with you. I would prefer you stayed away from Nathan Lark and his friends. They all survived, even the twins. Brock seemed surprised by this, then shrugged. Then they're truly blessed by Alita. How's the mage? She seemed to have a true spark of magic. Garna interrupted, blinking owlishly at the two of them. Please pause the prattle. Why are we here, Saria? This Nathan has insights from the universe beyond, the kind that are restricted from our lips. Do you wish to discuss how best to spread those insights further in a deniable manner? Ushia's chuckle started low and rose to a delighted laugh, rattling the room. It cannot be so simple, for I cannot see the future. Davrar itself is unable to predict the outcomes here, and so my talents are useless. She looked truly pleased by this outcome, green lips stretched wide over impressive teeth. Please, wise leader, tell us how this man will change all of Davrar. He figured out the truth, Saria said casually. What Davrar is, why this megastructure exists, who we are, and the basics of the distal expansion. She waved her hand towards Brox. I know you didn't speak of it. You are careless, but not even you would speak those truths, and Davrar would sanction you if you did. Brox frowned. I did not. How did he learn? Saria shrugged. Knowledge of the true universe, deduction, and the rule of simplicity. Your attitude and revelations of the rules of questers sped his journey, but all true powers know those details. Garna had lowered her quill to the table and was giving the conversation her full attention now. What is the importance? So he knows the nature of Davrar. What does he want, to become a quester himself? No, Ushia said, studying Saria. He wishes to change Davrar to his will. Saria nodded towards the big orc. He does. He wants to banish the endings as well as remove mind magic. Brock snorted. That vote was held after the ending of magic when we first saw true slaughter. It failed. His lip rose in derision and his voice was bitter. Our peers decided that some costs were worthwhile for their fun. Mind magic is popular, Ushia replied with her own sense of exasperation. Truth-telling spells alone, most questers support it, despite those who abuse mental mana. But think of the argument, Saria said. Recall the conclaves where we argued for changes to Davrar. Think of how moralistic the arguments are, how self-righteous. All those who oppose humanitarian changes need to do is mock the do-gooders, and the apathetic majority agrees. Garna gave an aggravated sigh, picking up the tale from Saria as if reciting a long-repeated argument. Then it devolves to meaningless duels that sway no votes, for there is no true risk, no real stakes, just empty entertainment and pole swinging. She cut her eyes towards Brox. The duels are fun, he said defensively. It's rare to fight other questers so easily. There's usually such a game of position and knowledge first. I enjoy a true fight without needing to engage in strategy first. Saria interrupted the byplay. But imagine the same argument being made by one who is not a quester. If Nathan stands in the conclave and declares Davrar is evil, he can condemn us without being one of us. It would carry weight. We could win the vote that followed. He is a thoughtful little prick, isn't he? Brox's voice was fond but contemplative. He'd be challenged to the duels and he doesn't respawn. That would draw attention. somebody who's not a quester fighting in the conclave ring. He thought about it a moment, then nodded decisively. I'd back that, but how do we get him there? And even after our victory, we don't have the influence to speak at a conclave, much less call one, and to bring a non-quester into the conclave. He trailed off, frowning as he considered the obstacles to what Saria was proposing. We reach out to our political allies. Ushia nearly spat the word. The Ashen Accord to start. They may have replaced their spines and skulls with neutronium, but they're well connected. If we can convince Kaylee's, then he could make it happen. Garna's brow furrowed as she turned her considerable intellect to this new problem. This plan is a promising proposal. But Kaylee's wouldn't move without agreement from the rest of the Ashen Accord. They'll need a demonstration, and he'll need proof to convince others to spend their influence on this. It is the rarest of our resources. His deeds must be undeniable, Ushia said slowly. Killing Badud was a beginning, but each victory must be greater than the last for this to be a valid course. We may not aid him overmuch either. Her expression remained troubled. What is his build? It must counter foresight in some way, since I have never been able to see him. Brox chuckled. Anti-magic combined with a potent healing talent and flight. He held his hands up defensively as the other two gave him confused looks. He's taken the insight further than any I've heard of. He retained memories through Badud's reverse time, so it can combat wizardry. And that was before slaying Badud and conquering the Ascendant Academy, a grand dungeon itself. You know how Davrar likes to reward true danger, so his class quality must be astronomical. My agent said he never truly committed to the fights she saw, Saria said next. Even against the Maelstrom, he supplied the kills to his allies so they would level. Ushia waved a hand as if to brush that away. We shall assume he can win against any foe. She snorted at the ridiculousness of her own words. What deeds would serve for this purpose? Conquer Esebus, Brock said grumpily, taking another sip of his drink. Garna shook her head shortly. That would be repeating a deed already done. If he and his allies were to defeat Badud's entire grid, then that would be a victory. Or clear a corrupted seal, Saria said slowly. That would be a deed that would raise his status in many questers' eyes. Garna rolled her eyes. Opportunities for formidable deeds abound, for this is Davrar, and that is what it was built for. But he will still die, either in attempting these deeds or in the duels. Will you trick him to his death? Will he break from this purpose once he understands the risks? Saria snorted and replied evenly. If I tell Nathan that this will kill him, I expect he'll smile and thank me for the opportunity. My skills tell me he will never stop attempting to reach his goal. His purpose is to fix Davrar into something he likes better, and if we show him the path, he will walk it regardless of the danger. Ushia pursed her lips and nodded. Then we shall do this. I wish to meet him and speak to his allies. If they are to truly do this, then they must become masters of their paths. I agree, Garna said. This is an idiotic idea, but if it's a chance to improve Davrar, to make our will known, then it is worth seizing the slightest chance of success. Brock snorted once more, waggling his finger at her. But it's not our will that would be implemented. It's his. The gathered questers considered that for a moment. Saria shrugged. That's probably better. Do you want to be known as the one who curtailed the freedom of the questers? Better that it be Nathan and the heirs. It would be a tale as potent as the deicide. Ushia's voice was quiet and deep, nearly shaking the table. Figments of Davrar itself rising up to ask us to refine our natures. Fitting, for that is its purpose, is it not? None of them had a good response to that, and they sat and finished their sungold in silence, watching the beasts of the deep swim through the waters around them and considering their mad plan.